That's a romantic gesture, but it could also be a manipulation technique that can really be someone trying to get control over you. And that is definitely a red flag when dating. This is your wake-up call.
When it comes to matters of the heart, I think we're more susceptible to manipulation, inappropriate messaging, and just probably ignoring more of the red flags than we should. So what romantic gestures are actually just a ruse?
Look at flattery, right? So that's a romantic gesture, but it could also be a manipulation technique. If someone is extremely flattering to you, if they are love bombing you, we know that that is going to end at some point. So it's very hard in the beginning because we want to believe in love, right? We've seen all the movies. We have all of the Hollywood in our mind about how it could just be magical. But I want you to think about it this way. If it feels too good to be true, I want you to pump the brakes. And what we're really talking about is what are the romantic gestures that can really be someone trying to get control over you. If you're an empath, right? If you're a highly sensitive person, and if you're a codependent, it's hard. Texting back and forth, and so much of dating now is texting is such a big part of what we do that you can't see that person. So in real life, if you're an empath or a codependent, I can read your body language, Lisa. I can see if you're sitting like this, that maybe something's wrong. But if you're leaning forward, I can see that you're interested. The way that you're looking at me. With texting, we don't have any of those nuances or any of those cues. So we're sort of just looking at it like, I'm not exactly sure what this means. And you may have someone who is sort of breadcrumbing you. This is another thing to look out for in the way of a ruse, because someone who is giving you just enough attention, just enough responses. Maybe you text them and they don't reply at all for like 2 days. That's definitely a red flag. And then you might have a day where they're sort of just blowing up your phone with maybe they're bored that day or whatever it is. But the intermittent, right, reinforcement is the thing that keeps you on the hook, where they're giving you just enough attention for you to be like, okay, maybe this thing is still happening. So inconsistency is something we want to look at. And someone giving you just enough to keep you going, but then sort of being rejecting and ignoring, that is definitely a ruse for control. And that is definitely a red flag when dating. If someone is flattering you and then they follow up with some kind of an ask, so you can sort of track it in your mind. When Tom is giving you flattery, a compliment, it's really not flattery, it's sincerely how he feels. It is an actual authentic compliment. Flattery has a tendency to talk about sort of fanning the flames of our ego, right? Flattery, it's like you want me to feel a particular something, but a genuine compliment, someone saying you're beautiful, someone saying I value your brain, someone saying I appreciate how consistent you are, those are actual compliments. So I think that I always can tell when someone is flattering me to butter me up for something. So that's when flattery can be a manipulation technique. So how do you look out for that? Is look for the follow-up. If someone gives you a compliment, you're so amazing, you're so good at this, you're so good at this, would you do mine for me, right? So that's the difference there. I think that's an important distinction. I think that with a genuine compliment, you know, and I know, that if Tom gives you a compliment or my husband gives me a compliment, I am going to feel a particular way, but that's not his motivation for saying the thing. If someone is wanting to use it as manipulation, the motivation for saying the thing, you're so beautiful, I appreciate you, is so that they can get you to do something for them.
So you said you can feel when someone's trying to butter you up. What are the signs then that you can sense when they're trying to, when someone's doing that?
It's funny, I have a gut reaction personally to that because I don't like to be managed by other people. It's not necessary. I don't like it. It feels very disrespectful to me. So if someone is really sort of blowing sunshine up my, you know what I mean? They're blowing sunshine as they're just over the top complimenting, I always feel suspect. What you really have to do is pay attention. This is the most powerful thing, is pay attention, not just to what someone is saying. We're paying attention to their follow-up actions. Be mindful. If a compliment always seems to have a string attached to it, then that's more flattery for the purposes of manipulating you than it is a legitimate compliment. So what you can do if you don't want to fall into this category is pay attention. What happens after the compliment? Does that person then follow up 2 hours later and ask you for something? And if that continues to happen, if you see a pattern, then you can clearly see that they're using flattery as manipulation. The truth will reveal itself in time. If you're just on their mind, they'll say, oh, I saw this thing, it reminded me of you because you and I went to the beach that time or whatever. It will make sense. How are you? And then they wait and let you tell them how you are. That's different than someone disappearing, coming back, and then being like, at 11 o'clock at night, you up, right? What does someone want? Again, we're looking at the motivation. What are they asking you for? If you're in the dating world, and if it's, you're just out there, your biggest protection is your boundaries. Early and often is asserting your preference early and often, and paying attention to what someone does and what they say, because they're two different things. People are habitual. So we look at patterns. Do they continue to follow through? That's someone who's probably, at the very least, that's someone who can show up. If it's someone who is popping back into your life like, oh, I had a dream about you, and in the dream, we reconnected and it was so beautiful, right? They probably didn't have a dream, let's just say. And they're like, and now I'm right next to your house. Are you up for company? You know what I mean? Again, we're looking at what do they want from you? And it will reveal itself in time, because an actual compliment is not followed up by a request for you to do something, right? An actual I'm thinking about you is not followed up necessarily with what can you do for me? And I think we have to pay attention. A lot of us, if I myself am a recovering codependent, I think that we're very used to doing things for other people. And like, it's hard for us to even think that it's not normal. Like, oh, they just need a favor. Or oh, maybe they're just in a jam. Maybe like we don't think that we're not looking at the patterns. So I always say to my therapy clients, it's so important that you take an inventory, as you said, of the patterns of behavior that you're seeing.
So if somebody hits you up then and they're like, oh, I just had a dream, like that exact scenario, and it's 11 at night and they're like, oh, and I'm around the corner. How do you, if that doesn't feel right to you, what is a well put together response to setting that boundary there?
Well, first of all, my advice would be don't let someone who has disappeared and come back into your life come over to your apartment at 11 p.m. That's my thought, because that's a booty call. And unless that's what's on your heart, and hey, there's nothing wrong with sex. If that's on your heart, that's okay. My feeling is someone needs to put in slightly more effort than I had a dream about you and I'm around the corner. So what you can say, if you do like the person, but you would like to share your boundary and you don't want them to come over, is to say, what a pleasant surprise. I was just actually turning off the light, so it's a little too late for me, but get in touch with me tomorrow and we can make a proper meetup plan. We can't conclusively know their motivation. So my feeling is when you protect yourself, their motivation doesn't really matter because they can't take advantage of you. Maybe it was sincere, maybe not. But if it really was just a booty call and then they got mad that you're not letting them come over, now that tells you more about their motive. If they go, oh my gosh, you're right, it is 11:02, it is too late, but I will absolutely get in touch with you tomorrow. Maybe they're sincere, and that's great, but our job is to have our own back, right? Our job is to go, I can count on me to not people please myself out of my own integrity. You know, like, no, yeah, I am worth a proper date. You disappeared, I'd love to know why. You want to see me? You being in the proximity of my hood is not a good enough reason, dude. Call me tomorrow, set up a proper plan. You can take me out to dinner. We can discuss, or not. But really having the self-respect to say no, to say that doesn't feel good, to say it doesn't work for me. I don't need to please this person. I really need to listen. It's us we have to live with until the end of time, right? You have to live with yourself. I have to live with myself. We have to be able to go, I can take care of myself.
Mm.
I can set my boundaries, and you can do it lovingly. You could do it flirting. You could do it cute. You could do it right. It doesn't have to be mean or aggressive. You can do it with kindness. The most important thing is that we are not doing things that make us feel bad about ourselves to please someone else.
Is that where people feeling taken advantage of comes from? Because you mentioned that earlier and that really hit me.
Well, the thing is, a lot of times we feel taken advantage of, but what's really happening in the dynamic is that we are in our own way, like serving ourselves up on a platter for people, right? If you're a giver, you're going to give. And you know who's going to take? Takers. And you know who needs to set limits is givers, because takers won't. They'll be like, great, more from you for me? Fantastic. So I think that, at least in my therapy practice, I've seen my clients sort of feeling like this person is entitled, this person is a boundary bully, or this person took advantage of me. And there's a famous Eleanor Roosevelt quote about, I'm butchering it, but basically nobody takes advantage of you without your permission. You know, and that's not to quote unquote victim blame. That's not what I mean. It's actually a very empowering truth to say they don't get to take advantage of me. It doesn't need to happen 1,000 times. If you feel like someone really is a taker and that the relationship is uneven and that you do a lot more than your share of the giving, that's on you. Now that's an inventory you have to do for yourself to be like, why do I feel like I need to overgive or overfunction to be worthy of love?
Yeah. Oh God. I love that you said that, like, not to victim blame, but it is on us, because I used to do that. I used to be like, I was taken advantage of. And it was, at the time, it was more of a relief to almost put it on them.
Yeah.
And once I realized I'm giving my power away, like, that isn't empowering at all. How do I take ownership over this? How do I say, hang on a minute, I maybe saw the red flag, or maybe I didn't even see the red flag, and I just took that person for their word. But I don't know if I can, like, why did I trust this stranger's word in the first place without proof of them being able to deliver on it? And so once I started to pivot, like you said, of like actually taking ownership over, hang on a minute, no one does it without my consent, again, not to victim blame, it was so empowering to me.
Oh my God. Well, that's the whole thing. It's so depressing. Feeling unempowered, feeling like this person has power over me is so depressing. And there's something that, even though it's scary to change those dynamics, you really can do it. And there's something so liberating when you go, oh, it's really about me saying no. It's about me. When we think about boundaries, right? The way that I talk about boundaries, it's about your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers. So setting limits with people, right? It doesn't mean we're always no, no, no all the time. It doesn't have to be like that. But we have to have the ability to set limits. And that scenario of someone getting in touch at 11 o'clock at night, let's say, is a perfect place to, where you set a limit, meaning it's too late for me to want to welcome you into my home. And here's your alternative, right? That's what negotiating is in relationships, where it isn't all black or white, like either you win or I win. It can be a negotiation, like, oh, you would like to come over to my house at 11 o'clock at night. I am not good with that, but I would love to hear from you tomorrow, and we can make a plan to have lunch or dinner, right? Something that would make you feel comfortable. So that's setting a limit, which is really is a powerful part of boundary setting.
Yeah. And would that apply then to, so let's say breadcrumbing, that was the other one that you brought up after flattery. So with breadcrumbing, if someone's hitting you back up, how do you decipher, especially through text? Because that was another thing that you said. Texting is very hard to know what they mean and what they don't mean, what is sincere, what's not sincere, what's actually a genuine compliment versus a flattery to get something. So how do you start to look at texting? And let's use the breadcrumbing as the example.
Well, first of all, the second someone is not getting back to you, that's a red flag, unless that feels good to you, because I'm going to say I know it doesn't. Now, everyone has a different idea of what it means to get right back to someone. So yours might be, maybe you're on your phone a lot, and maybe yours is like instantaneous reply is what you're expecting. Or maybe you're anxious, maybe you're anxiously attached. And so that waiting is like, ooh, creates anxiety for you. I understand that. Other people, they may be like, maybe they don't text throughout the day because of work, and maybe they get back to people at night. This is where effective communication comes in. So I have an expectation, and I will have this conversation with anyone, whether it's business, there's an expectation that you will get back to me because your time is not more important than mine. And so I feel like, especially women in particular, feel I don't want to be a nag. I don't want to be perceived as being like extra and like too much. Needy. Oh my God, how much women do not want to feel like they're being needy. And that feels like we're trying to kind of be the cool girls to a degree. But I think that communication boundaries are really important, and to have the conversation, right? Even when you start, if you don't hear back from someone for days after you've been, let's just say this, because this is what breadcrumbing really is. There'll be communication, there'll be no communication. They'll be like, we should get together, but then no follow-up to get together. So again, it's like dangling a carrot of like, this could be something great. Yeah, or maybe it's nothing at all. We have no idea. So there has to be a conversation. That's how you can not feel victimized in that situation. And a lot of my clients will say, but then I'm afraid they're going to not want to, then they're going to like break up with me basically, or not want to date me anymore. And I always say, listen, if you having a clarifying conversation with someone about communication makes them run for the hills, they're so not ready for a relationship. They're going to run for the hills anyway. You're just making it happen sooner and not wasting your youth and your beauty on this person who's really never going to turn into anything.
And so how do you, what if they're busy, Terri? What if they're just busy?
Yep.
And in that moment, they really do mean that they want to get together with you, and work calls and the stress, and maybe there's someone who actually can't handle stress well. And so the only way they can handle stress is to not text you back.
I say people do what they really want to do. That's what I say, because it's the truth. If you're lit up about someone, even if you're busy as heck, even if you're overwhelmed, you'll get up early. You'll find a way. You will take a break at lunch. You'll go into the bathroom and be like, hey, thinking about you. I'm super slammed, but just hope you're having a great day. It takes literally 3 seconds. So really, when you think about someone who's sort of ghosting you intermittently, right, in between, there is something specific going on. So if someone is super busy, listen, we get busy. This is life. Some people can make mistakes. They can say, I'll call you, and then they can forget, or they fall asleep. I mean, I'm not saying real life doesn't happen, but there's a way to communicate. Hey, I'm so sorry. I said I'd call you last night. Had such a long week. I literally fell asleep at 7 o'clock, and I woke up at 11 and thought it was too late to call. Deeply apologize, right? There's a way. So I think that what we don't want to do is get into a situation where our desires, our needs don't matter, where we are organizing and sort of wrapping ourselves around the desires, needs, wants, reality of someone else, which is what happens, especially if you are a codependent. You like let the other person lead for how it's going to be. But that doesn't actually work ultimately, because in the end, you'll be mad. You'll feel underappreciated. You will be underappreciated. So there has to be a mutuality of, even in the beginning of the getting to know each other, where what kind of a communicator are you? It's like a perfectly legitimate. Do you like texting? Are you more of a phone person? Do you like throughout the day? I'm more of a person. After work is better for me. Like, you tell them, we set people up to succeed by telling them our preferences, our limits, our deal breakers before they're trampling all over our boundaries.
And so if they start to trample over our boundaries in those situations, how do you start to address that?
I think early and often. It's if the person says, I'm going to call you on Friday, and they don't, and let's say maybe they didn't fall asleep and they didn't acknowledge it, but they just didn't do it, the next time we talk, you have a choice. They can go, oh, hey, babe, how was your weekend? And either you play along with their non-reality, you pretend like they pretended they never said they'd call you on Friday. You pretend with them because you're so afraid of conflict, or you're so afraid of confrontation, or you're so afraid of being rejected. Or you say, hey, I thought I was going to hear from you on Friday, and when I didn't, I thought you just had a flaky moment. I thought you must have been, maybe you had a rough week, or something to acknowledge the fact that you expect people to do what they say they're going to do. I mean, that is if you do what you say you're going to do, right? So I would let people know, right? Like, and it doesn't have to be a huge case, right? It doesn't have to be a horrible thing. It can be the truth. Hey, when I didn't hear from you on Friday, I just figured you had a crazy week. I actually had a great weekend. I ended up not being home on Friday, whatever your thing is. But you're saying, hey, there, you said you would call me and you didn't. Here's the thing, man. You don't have to say you're going to call me. You don't have to call me. But don't say you're going to if you're not. Expect people to do what they say they're going to do.
What up, homie? I got something free and new to share with you right now. How often are you visited by that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, experienced enough, not fill in the blank? One of the most powerful things you can learn to do in life is to turn that negative voice into your bestie. And I want to teach you how to do that and so much more in my 4 Steps to Becoming Confident workshop. And guys, the most amazing thing is you can actually register for completely free for this workshop. So click the link on your screen and I'll see you on the inside. And do you suggest, I love that breakdown, you're so freaking practical, it's amazing, to make those statements? Or my natural inclination is just to ask questions like, oh, how come you didn't call? But I do worry sometimes that I end up becoming more of, not the manipulator, but like the passive aggressive one that's asking questions, but really I'm showing that I'm annoyed.
Yes. And here's the thing. I say don't do that, because the bottom line is you're not really curious why they didn't call. You want to point out, hey, just so we're on the same page, you said you'd call on Friday. I'm pointing out that you didn't. And we can do it in a non-super aggressive way. Exactly. But you have to say it. Like, it's funny. Sometimes people will make up excuses for you. Oh, I just assumed you got caught up. And actually, Matthew Hussey is the one who had this great, he had a great sort of text response. If like someone that you're only dating like a little bit hits you up at 11 o'clock at night and is like, hey, I'm in your hood, wanna hang out? And that he had this really funny response that where the person could write back and say, oh, hey there, you must be confusing me with someone who's had many more dates with you. I hope you have a great night. I'm hitting the sack, or something like that, where you're doing it cute, it's kind of flirty, but you're acknowledging that, no, you think I'm a booty call? I'm not. That's what you're establishing, even though, and you can still like the person, you can still date them, right? People treat us the way we tolerate a lot of times. And it may not say something great about them, but it might be fine. Like, not everyone has the same sort of value around sexuality and sex. Some people feel like it's fine to have sex on the first date. Now, I'm an older person, like, or I don't know, I never was on a dating app because I've been married for 25 years. So I feel like it does actually matter. Not that sex is bad, I don't think it is. But I think that you've got to be clear about what is okay with you. You've got to be clear about what is okay with you.
I think sometimes though, and I'm really just thinking back of like when the moments where I was like asking the questions, like maybe it was coming a bit across passive aggressive. I think also part of it is to protect my own self-esteem, that I'm asking questions for them to give me an answer that actually then computes with the idea that I have about them.
Yeah. And the idea that you have about yourself.
Yeah.
Because it's like, if they're like, hey, there was a huge, wreck on the 10 and that's why, right? Even though of course that makes no sense, seeing as that we all have cell phones, but whatever. Like, let's just say you're hoping they come up with a legitimate reason.
But the phone died.
Yes, exactly. And I didn't have my charger with me, let's say, because then you wouldn't feel bad. right? We wouldn't feel like we were just not that important to them or that we were marginalized. I think that the creating boundary scripts, creating scripts to be able to have these conversations is so incredibly important. And actually in the workbook, which we have sitting right here, I actually created I took all the feedback that people had in all these interviews that I've done, and people, what they wanted was more scripts. Just help me with the words, because I have the feeling, I know how I feel, I just don't know how to say. So in the workbook is all brand new. This is not a companion book. This is a new book. So whether you read Boundary Boss, great. If you did not, it doesn't matter. This is a standalone experience, which I did super intentionally, because some people are just like workbook people. Or some people, maybe you didn't read the book and that's okay. You don't need to. And I put, nothing is repeated from the book. This is all new stuff. Moving into how can you create scripts that feel good to you, as opposed to like the perfect words, because it's not about the perfect words. It's about the perfect words for you. Like, how would you say it? How would I say it? And a lot of times that's different.
Yeah, I love your workbook. It's so good. I read it. And what I love is in those moments, and I think my audience can relate to this very much, is that we do feel emotional around these things, especially when it's like where we started, the romantic gestures, the thing where it comes to the heart, like it can be very difficult. I'm not going to lie, if it's a work thing or a family thing, like it's still very difficult. But when it comes to matters of the heart, there's so much emotion, self-esteem, confidence that gets wrapped up into these communication that in order to protect myself from that, sometimes I do find it hard to then set that boundary. And I don't think it's a conscious thing, but I want to feel good about myself. So I'm giving this person an opportunity, but now I actually feel like sometimes I'm giving them an easy out.
In what way?
By asking them questions, it gives them an opportunity to make excuses that I go, oh, okay, well, fine. Yeah, okay. It was an accident on the freeway and your phone died all at once. Okay, that makes sense. But how do you then decipher in those situations what is actually true and what isn't true?
Well, two things. One, what you were just talking about, like, oh, your phone died and there was a wreck on the highway. These are the lies we tell ourselves, right? That's actually what I call it in the book, and that's what I call it in life, where to make it more palatable for us, because we don't want to have a hard conversation, or we don't want to maybe admit that this person is not prioritizing us in a way that we would like them to. Especially when I was younger, I would just make up excuses for other people's crap behavior because I didn't have the skills to have the conversation. And I was too insecure to be able to walk away from something. Like, I was easily manipulated in my 20s because I was such a big heart, and I wanted to feel good about myself as well. So anyway, I feel you is what I'm saying there. Moving to how do we know what's true was the question. This is where it's so incredibly important that we know ourselves, because you need to know what's true for you, which means, what are your values? What is the most important thing to you? How do you feel about someone saying they're going to call you and not call you? Is that okay with you? It's not okay with me. So I'm so clear about that. Like, what is your value? What is your worth to yourself? I think every single person watching this and listening to this is worthy of being treated with respect. But we have to treat ourselves with respect. It all comes from you. When you think about our relationship with ourselves, this literally sets the bar for every other relationship in your life. And I think we were talking about this last time, that if you treat yourself like crap, if you're last on your own list, if you talk badly about yourself, whether it's just in your own head or whether it's actually outwardly to the world, saying negative things about yourself so you don't threaten anyone else, you will inevitably attract people who agree with that low self-assessment. So if you don't rest when you're tired, right? If you don't think that what you think matters, if you don't assert yourself, if you go along to get along, you'll find people who are like, right on. This can be all about me. This person wants to make it all about me, which is really how narcissists and codependents have this, it's like they fit like a hand in glove. Because think about what a codependent is like. You know, narcissist is like, hey man, it's all about me. And a codependent is like, yay, it's all about you. right? So it's like a match made in heaven, but not really, because then all hell will break loose eventually.
Explain, you've mentioned codependency quite a bit in this interview, just in case people aren't sure what that is. Don't
Sure.
mind breaking that down.
Codependency, according to me, is when we are overly invested in the feeling states, the decisions, the relationships, the outcomes of the people in our life to the detriment of our own inner peace. So, like, your best friend has a crisis, and you are like, that crisis is now your crisis. Your partner is upset, right? Let's say your partner comes home from work, you're in a fine mood, everything is great. They're in a rotten mood. Now, suddenly your fine mood goes out the window, and you're doing everything you can to like manage their mood. Maybe you could, let me get you a glass of wine and let me, again, it really is. Codependency, honestly, is a covert or overt bid to control other people. How other people feel, how other people act, what other people are doing with their own lives. You don't want your best friend to marry that jerk, so you're trying to tell her all the reasons why she shouldn't. Like, it's so much about controlling other people, but in the process, we are neglecting our own inner life and our own lives. We're so busy being like out there, making sure everyone else is okay and everyone else has what they need according to us. So that's codependency. So you can see how, in a way, that would fit sort of perfectly with someone who is very self-absorbed and someone who is really only interested in getting their own needs met. And it is a very seductive pairing that can be really difficult. I mean, it really is a trauma bond, but can be really difficult to get out of. Even though you know you should, it's very compelling because there's a cycle. There's a cycle of where it's good, right? You have the love bombing, you have the positive stuff, a lot of times narcissists are super compelling, charming, amazing storytellers. So in the beginning, especially the first time around, you have no idea. You're like, wow, this is like a dream come true. Here's Prince Charming, amazing. And then there will come a point where the devaluing begins. And it might just start like something small, like, are you really gonna wear those pants to this party? I gotta tell you, honestly, I don't think you should. Where maybe they never said anything like that before, and you're like heartbroken from that, and that's the beginning. Now you're trying to get back in their good graces. You're like, oh, maybe that was just a moment in time. Maybe they didn't really mean that. And then there'll be more and more and more of that devaluing until a lot of times there's a full-on discard where they break up, they ice you out, they don't talk to you, they whatever. Again, you're scratching to get back into the good graces. This is a cycle that could go on for the rest of your life, but it's abusive, obviously.
How do you start to identify that in the early stages? Because you were saying the love bombing. We've spoken about love bombing before, and it's something I've spoken many times on the show, but it is really one of those things I really want to wrap my head around because it just feels good in the moment. It feels really good when someone is taking you out and, telling you you're beautiful and treating you to dinner and picking you up and taking you to these amazing places. Like, it feels really good. And so I understand and totally hear what you're saying about that can be super dangerous, but how do you start to identify that, especially if it's a narcissist with a codependent?
Part of it is, I can tell you from my therapy clients that even though it feels good, there's a little part that feels like it's too fast. There's a part of you that is like, okay, I mean, we've seen each other every day for 14 nights straight, and now you don't want me to see my friends tonight. Tonight's a very special night, according to you. Like, again, the manipulation, how do they behave? If you're experiencing this, my advice to you, which is what I tell my therapy clients, is I want you to tap the brakes just a little and let's see how they react or respond. Because if it's not a narcissist, if it's just a regular person who's really just head over heels for you, they're not going to lose it if you tap the brakes. If you say, hey, I have a weekend planned to go away with my girlfriends. I planned it before we got together. Or maybe I planned it now, because you shouldn't not have to have friends because you're in a relationship. And if they are like upset, if they can't believe how ungrateful you are because they had planned something big the weekend and even though they didn't clear it with you, right? Their narcissists can be so clever and so smart in their manipulation. So I say, tap the brakes a little. Or if they say, oh, I planned dinner for us to go to Italian, and you could say, hey, you know what? I really feel like having Japanese tonight. Do you mind if we switch it to a Japanese place? If it's really a narcissist, it's going to be really hard for them to hide their annoyance at the nerve you have for like wrecking their perfect plan for the evening. If it's a regular person, they're going to be like, no problem. All right, Japanese sounds good, or you know what I mean? So those are a few ways, but trust your gut. And when I say trust it, I mean start to tap into it. How do you feel? Because here's the thing, Lise, there are so many red flags that when someone is love bombing us, we are ignoring the red flags. If someone you've known for 2 weeks is making a plan for you to do something with them in 3 years from now, like that's too much future baiting, right? That's too much. That's making the assumption, and it's manipulative because it's making the assumption to you that we're going to be together in 3 years from now. According to me, it's a paved road. It's a done deal. I don't know. We've been dating 3 weeks. Is it a done deal? Maybe not. So it's paying attention to what language they're using. Do they like your friends? Do they not like your friends? Because a lot of times in the beginning, they may be like, it's great. But soon they're going to start not liking your friends, saying bad things about your friends, not wanting you to go out with your friends, wanting to have you all to themselves. So if you start feeling isolated from friends and family, like these are red flags for you to really look at and to push back, to assert yourself. This person's like, I can't believe you want to go see your family. Say, I want to and I'm going to see my family, right? Like there's ways that you can be less malleable, less manipulatable, let's say, and this will reveal what this person is capable of. And another thing I want to talk about, Lisa, in relationships and in dating is fear. You should not be afraid of the person that you're dating. And I guarantee you, anyone in a toxic relationship is afraid much of the time. You look at how often are you walking on eggshells? No. Walking on eggshells is not love. It's fear. And it's pleasing. We want to please this person so much, but that isn't love. You're repeating something from your childhood. Ask yourself, who does this person remind me of? Where have I felt like this before? How is this behavioral dynamic familiar to me? Like I'm trying to get approval from this person. I don't want them to be mad at me. And probably many people will be able to go back to the original injuries, which is probably a parent. And we need to do something with that original injury. We need to tend to that. We need to give that attention because as human beings, we can, when we have injuries, we can either talk them out or act them out. And that's what you're doing. If you're in a relationship with someone where you're walking on eggshells and you're afraid and you want to please them and you're scared of them, you're acting something out. But it will not fix the original injury. And you're going to keep acting it out until you heal that original injury.
Even if you think like, because as you were talking, I was like, oh, what about those moments where you are just worried about being alone, let's say? Is that still then an echo of potentially your past as a child, of having felt abandoned?
I feel like it can be both, honestly, because loneliness is real, but it's okay to feel lonely, right? And it's actually important to be alone. I feel like many of my clients, and I used to in my young life too, go from relationship to relationship where there was not much time in between those relationships. I was overlapping them because I didn't want to be alone. And then when I finally took the time to be alone and really got to know myself in therapy, and I couldn't believe the relationships that I'd stayed in so long simply because I was afraid to be alone. Even though I knew the relationship was over, I probably stayed in some relationships like 3 years too long. 3 years after the expiration date was so clear, and yet I was like, ugh, but I'm afraid to be alone. I've already invested so much time, right? Think of all the ways that we convince ourselves to stay in situations that in our heart of hearts, we're like, yeah, man, this is never gonna, like, there's no way this is making it for the long haul. And really, it's okay to be alone. So I think it's important that we don't look at being alone as like something bad, right? It's an important time. Being alone is a really beautiful time to get to know yourself.
Yeah, agreed. There was actually something else that you said that really hit me. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I was like, oh my God, this is a huge aha moment for me. when you're saying in the love bomb stage where someone's like, in 3 years, like, oh, we're going to get married, we're going to have kids. It really hit me as such a strong manipulation tactic, because what they're doing is they're helping you paint the future. And so if you even consider breaking up with that person, now it's almost like we have to let go of this future that you've actually painted together.
Yep. Oh, it definitely can be a manipulation technique, especially if it's too early. Because listen, we all fall in love, and the first thing first thing you do is you're like, could I picture spending the
Hmm.
rest of my life with this person? Could I picture traveling with them? And if someone wants to have kids, could I picture having kids with them? Could I picture my family liking his family or their family, right? Like those things are natural, but when it's one person who's voicing it, right? In the love bombing phase early on. Like, I see you as the mother of my children, and I see blah, blah, blah. That is exactly what you're saying, where now they're sucking you in. They're digging their hooks in more deeply because they're also like tying into your fantasy, because we all want something in our lives. And many of us want lasting love, right? Not everybody, but many, many people. We're seeking our person, someone who we can build a life with.
So what's the difference then, let's say in situations like that, where some people, you give them the benefit of the doubt versus, oh no, you actually need to have the doubt here.
Yes. I think, again, we are taking an inventory and we are paying attention and we are being awake. We're not being seduced by their behavior to be asleep. We are awake and paying attention to what they're doing and what they're saying. That is really important. So if they are, it depends on what are they doing? Like, what is their behavior? If they're not following through, right? Because we kind of switched gears into narcissism and
Hmm.
looking into that stuff. This is really, with narcissism, this is a different thing to pay attention to, because you're really talking about people who can be very emotionally dangerous and incredibly charming. That's why it's called love bombing. That's what it feels like. You don't even have time to come up for air and to be
Mm.
like, wait a minute, how do I feel about this? Did I just plan a trip to wherever? Like am I going to Paris with this person? Like, what is happening? Even though it's exciting. So what I do, I invite you, if you're in a situation like this or you've had this experience, to really think about, what were the red flags that you ignored? Because they are there. I promise you that even the most clever narcissist is revealing themselves in some way. But it's so, we have the love hormones like pulsating through our bodies. So it's so easy to
Mm.
be like, I'm high on dopamine. I don't know what's going on.
Mm.
But you do. So I say, you don't have to be, it doesn't have to be a bummer. I'm not saying that every person who treats you well is love bombing you. Here's the thing. Someone said to me, oh, so if someone treats you great and takes you out and gives you compliments, that just means they're a manipulative narcissist? I'm like, of course not. Because if they're not, that behavior will stay. My husband is the same, loving. Someone might say he is bombing me, but he doesn't, because it's 25 years. He's just a lover. He's just kind. He's just thoughtful. He's just always thinking about me, because that's his nature and the relationship that we have. If it doesn't end, it's not love bombing, right? The whole
Mm.
love bombing is only a manipulation technique that gets you under the person's spell, but then they become mean, judgmental, manipulative, step out on you, all these things. So if that doesn't happen, maybe they're just a super thoughtful, lovely person. But I find that a super lovely person who's just generous and loving is not someone who feels compelled to accelerate the timeline, creating like a false sense of intimacy that has not been earned. It is unearned intimacy. If in 3 weeks the person's like, let's pick out our wedding venue, you're like, hello? And if you may want to go along with it because you're afraid to say, hey, it's a little soon, and they may make you feel terrible for saying it's a little soon. I can't believe this. I thought we were on the same page. I thought you loved me. I thought, you're the one. How can you be like this? You're breaking my heart. Like, there's all of these different ways that someone can overreact when you're trying to tap the brakes, even tapping it a little. Pay attention to that. If someone overreacts like that, no, They've got some other game. There is some other manipulation technique at work right there. They're trying to get a certain amount of control over you because you have a right to the way you feel, right? Any relationship that's highly codependent, a lot of times it's like it has to be groupthink, like we're not allowed to have our own feelings. You're allowed to say, hey, I need some time. I need to spend time with my friends. I'm doing that this weekend, and expect the other person to respect it, right? We can't be so invested in their approval that we self-abandon.
Speaking of self-abandon, as we're going through all of this, I love the tactics that you're giving. You start to set the boundaries. But often I notice that we then abandon our boundaries because of the dopamine, because of the excitement. Like when you said they love bomb you so you don't have time to come up for air, like that visual really hit me, because once you get caught up in that momentum, that you're almost like shutting down your subconscious of actually speaking to you. And when you come up for air, you then like, oh, is this too soon? And so that really hit me. But in that process, even if you've set the boundaries and you've done the work, how do you make sure that you don't self-abandon and abandon your boundaries?
You know, it's a really good point that you bring up, because especially if you're not used to setting boundaries, or if you're not used to people respecting your boundaries, there is, and I write about this in the book about, I have a 24 or 48-hour rule that once you set a boundary, you cannot, my suggestion is, do not go back and take it back. Give yourself the time. It's okay. If it's new to you, you're going to feel anxious about setting a boundary. You're going to be worried about being rejected. That's okay. Go out with your friends, watch a movie, like do something to distract yourself, but don't take it back. Because if you felt strongly enough to set it in the first place, it's probably a valid boundary request that you put out there. And when the other person says, okay, I respect your boundary, blah, 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 do not say, it's no big deal. Do not say, all right, just this time is fine, but for next time. Do not say, I don't know, I think I was making a big deal out of nothing. These are all the ways that we can self-abandon. So you got to get used to what it feels like to be respected. Get used to what it feels like to respect yourself. Because here's the thing, Lise, how we feel, what we think, what we want, how we feel, this has to be the most important thing to us. It can't be your partner, how they think, what they want, how they feel. We care about those things. It's very incredibly important to me how my husband feels. It can't be more important to me than how I feel, because this is how I can navigate my life, honestly and truthfully, is through my actual feelings. It doesn't mean I don't sometimes compromise. Of course I do in a long-term relationship, and you know this too. You and Tom do it as well. That's how we stay together. A lot of times with my husband and I, we'll literally say, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your desire on this? If my husband says anything over 7, I'm doing whatever that is. Even if I don't feel like doing it, right? If his is a 7 and I'm like, I don't know, I don't feel like doing it, but it's like a 5, I'll do it because it's more important to him. But in this big scheme of life, anybody watching, anybody listening, your feelings have got to be, your feelings, thoughts, desires, what you want, that has to matter to you. And I feel like a lot of my therapy clients, they make their partners' thoughts, feelings, desires the most important thing, and pleasing them the most important thing. But in the end, that's a short game. That doesn't work for a long life. Like it doesn't work for a long life. We can't do it forever because we end up really martyred. We end up really mad at the other person. We're like, I sacrificed so much for you. And you're like, but who made you do that? You chose to do that. So it's very important that we talk about these things in relationships so that you're not endlessly self-sabotaging and endlessly self-abandoning in service of the relationship, because ultimately it doesn't serve anybody.
You said earlier that you were codependent. So how did you work through that? So to make sure then that you wouldn't then abandon yourself and your boundaries, because you were saying in relationships it's important to be able to negotiate and to compromise and to make sure that it's, you do want to make sure that it's about yourself, but also when you're in a partnership, considering that other person. How did you actually then work through that if your inclination is to be a codependent?
Well, for me, I had one really brutal relationship that was very codependent,
Mm.
and it was incredibly exhausting and so emotionally distressing. And it was relative pretty long. There was a number of years, and I really super loved this person, so we were also madly in love. But I learned that being codependent meant I would never be free, that I could never be myself because he wanted me all to himself, and I'm such an extrovert, and I knew there was something big. This is decades ago, but I knew my future was going to look like similar to what it does look like. And I knew I needed someone who was willing to share me with lots of people and who felt very secure. So how I changed it is I broke it down in therapy to understand, how did I end up in that relationship? Why did I feel responsible for that person's happiness, their actual feelings? I felt like were my responsibility. Like if he didn't like something I was doing, I would stop doing it. I remember where we hit a tipping point in the relationship where I'd gone away with my friends, and like, I would be talking to him the whole time that I was away. And do you know what I mean? Like you can't even be there because I'm worried
Mm.
that he's upset, like what's happening at home with him and the cats while I'm here, like not enjoying my friends. And all my friends hated me being in that relationship because I was barely around. Anyway, when I came back, I remember we had this fight, and he was like, "You don't understand. I don't like it when you do whatever the thing was." And I got it. And I was like, "My God, you don't understand. We're two different people. You cannot like it, and I can still do it." And I knew, I was like, I got to get out of this relationship.
Mm.
And I soon after that realization, where I was like, he really thinks he has a right to tell me what I can and cannot do in this life. No, no. I got to be the boss of me. I got to be the only boss of me. And I really broke up, moved out. Then I doubled up on my therapy, and I was like, how do I not repeat this? And I was very clear that it was telling the truth about my preferences, my limits, and my deal breakers early and often in relationships. When I met my husband, I was like, this is what I'm looking for. I want someone who wants to have a first house and a second house. I would love to have a little like lake house somewhere. It'd be great. Someone who, I just had my list. Someone who has their own career, has their own money, is not threatened by my career or my money. Like I just said it because I was like, I don't want to spend another second in a relationship with someone with an unexamined mind. I just don't. If you hadn't had, I was like, I'm not dating anyone who hasn't had 20 years of therapy, literally. When I asked my husband, I was like, well, what do you think about therapy? He's like, I'm a big fan. I was like, how big? He was like, I've had a lot of therapy. I was like, if you had to approximate, he's like, at least 20 years. I was like, okay, date 2 can happen.
How did you then get to that tipping point in that first relationship to leave? Because I'm always thinking about, sometimes you have to hit rock bottom in order to get back up or to change your life.
Yeah.
But hitting rock bottom freaking sucks. And so I think about people that may never get to that tipping point. So they just live their entire lives in this toxic cycle. So what do you think it was that allowed you to get to that tipping point, which then after you got back from that vacation, you could then speak up?
Well, I think that we have to establish that living a mediocre life also sucks. And if you're in a relationship where you're walking on eggshells and you're afraid of the person and you feel responsible for their feelings, which you actually cannot be, that's definitely not your best life. So I think that's important to establish, right? That you being your balls to the wall, fully expressed, unique self, which we cannot do in toxic or unhealthy relationships, that's the goal in life, is to be you being the youest you that you can possibly be, which honestly we can't do in toxic relationships because that person's trying to control us and keep us small. So I feel like anybody can do what I did. The real thing is, so many of my clients would say, this person, they didn't do anything terrible to me. Like there's nothing really wrong with them. I'm like, hey man, there doesn't have to be anything wrong with them for them to be wrong for you. Right? You are not unloving if you don't want to stay with someone because they're not lighting you up, because you no longer want to have sex with them, because you thought they were a different person, and they're not. They're not doing their work. You're evolving, changing, growing, doing your thing. They're not. That people can grow apart, and you can invite someone to grow with you. And then there comes a point, if they're not going to do it, that you have to save yourself. The boat is sinking. Get off. Swim away. It's okay for you to save yourself, because this is your one and only life. This is not a dress rehearsal. Like, we're live right now. This is it, people.
And that was what you just had enough of it, where you realized that you weren't living that perfect, like that life that you'd envisioned?
Well, I missed the other parts of who I was. I wasn't just this person's girlfriend. And in that life, that is what I was. Even though I was a talent agent with a big career, even though I have 3 sisters that I love to death and the same friend since 1970, like, I had a big life before, and my life got boiled down to like what I did with that person in that apartment. Everything else was fraught. Traveling, going to parties, like so insecure. This guy was endlessly like, I really think you're gonna leave me. Finally, I thought, that's the best idea you've ever had. I'm definitely gonna leave you, which I didn't say, but I was thinking like, yeah. So I think that for me, it was an accumulation of a lot of things, but also my truest self. And I'd had a lot of therapy. My truest self was like, I'm never going to be able to evolve in this relationship because it requires me to be too small. I'd rather be alone than be people pleasing until my dying day. Like, I don't want to manage. Because think about it, what are we doing in a relationship like this? We are managing the other person. We're not connecting in a heart way. We're managing. I didn't even care about how I felt. I just cared about how he felt. That's not love. That's manipulation in itself.
So identity, you having the identity of, oh, my identity right now is of being his girlfriend, and that is it.
Right.
And then projecting what my life would look like if I stayed in this relationship.
Yes. And I did not like what I saw. I was like, it's scary to be alone. You know what? It's scarier to think about being in this apartment in 50 years from now. You know?
I think that that's super powerful. As we're talking about boundaries and manipulation tactics, I've heard you talk about how people actually will use boundaries as a manipulation tactic. And you use the example of Jonah Hill. So if you don't mind explaining that, like I'd never thought about this before.
Yes. So if you don't know, the Jonah Hill thing quickly is that he went into the DMs of this gal who is a professional surfer. So her whole Instagram account is her as a surfer in bathing suits with other surfers. That's what she does. So they started dating. And what became public was exchanges between them where he was basically, this is 6 months. Via text. Yeah. But maybe 8 months into the relationship. And I don't have all the details perfectly, so don't fact check me, other than I know that we were privy to their text messages. This is a year after they broke up. His girlfriend went public with what had gone on between them because it was super toxic and manipulative, and she was really like, just couldn't stay silent. So I'm not approving of that, disapproving of that. Let's just talk about the actual content. Basically, the content is he was saying, you need to be the type of person who doesn't go out to lunch with your floozy girlfriends, basically. The type of person who goes out to lunch or spends any time with other men at all. You need to be taking these pictures off your Instagram feed, the ones in your bathing suit, the trashy, but the way he was saying it, he was trying to make it seem all above board. So he gives a list of demands and then says, these are my boundaries. And if you can't agree to these boundaries, no hard feelings, then you're just not the right person for me. So the internet was like blowing up, and so many people who don't know squat about boundaries was like, I mean, why is he wrong? Why is he wrong? He said it's okay if she didn't agree. I was like, no. That's what he said, but that's not what he meant. Because literally what he did, he knew exactly who she was when he was attracted to her because of her Instagram feed. He knew she was a professional surfer. She's going to be in bathing suits because that's your outfit when you're a surfer, right? You're going to be wearing pants on your surfboard? Probably not. So him going in and saying, you're the kind of person, like if you're the kind of person who is okay with this, then you're not my kind of person anymore. Then you're not the kind of person I want to be in a relationship with. All judgmental. It would be like her meeting him as a famous actor and 6 months later saying, you're the kind of person, I need you to be the kind of person who no longer does any romantic leads. You can only be the sidekick because that's my boundary. You kissing another woman in a role, even though that's your job, which was your job the moment I met you and I knew it, now my boundary says you can't do that anymore. So in neither one of those cases would that be a boundary. This is someone trying to mask manipulation and control. It's coercive control because I'm trying to make you feel like crap about yourself because you're the kind of person who has pictures of yourself scantily clad on your Instagram account. So it's control. It's not a boundary. So clarity, our boundaries are about us. Her boundary, eventually, I think she broke up with him, is to say, you are not the boss of me. I didn't suddenly become a surfer. It's like you didn't meet me as, like, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't become a surfer, I already was. Her boundary is, I will not take down pictures on my Instagram feed because it makes you feel insecure. Those pictures have been there since you met me. You knew who I was. And that would be asserting yourself and your own boundaries. Like, I will not be controlled. Because that's what our boundaries do for us. So it's not her telling him he can't be in a movie with a romantic movie, right? That's not a boundary because that's me asserting control over you. I have a right to assert control over me. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. So it's like sometimes I'll hear, like one of my clients had a boyfriend who was like, when you're out with your girlfriends, you need to call me every hour. That's my boundary. Because you know how I can feel insecure. And she was like, well, I mean, it's not a big deal. I can do it. I was like, well, first of all, that's not a boundary. That's a request, right? That's a request. That's not a boundary. They're different things. Do you want to go out with your friends and on the 7:59, 8:59, 9:59, you got to call your boyfriend? Do you want to? Because that's control, right? It's like, or that same boyfriend would send a text to her saying, I know you're out with your girlfriends. I hope you're having fun without me. LOL. Uh-huh. LOL. No, you're not LOLing, buddy. You're trying to make her feel bad. Right? There's no LOLing. No. You're like, trying to make you feel bad that you went out with your friends.
And that's why I put the caveat, like, at the end, like, without me.
Uh-huh. Hope you're having fun without me. That same boyfriend, she broke up with him since then, that same boyfriend would do what we just called vague posting. If he was mad at her, he would like post something really weird on Instagram, like, some people just can't be trusted. You're like, oh, is everything okay? Like to get a rise and to make her feel insecure and be like, is he mad at me about something?
That second guessing.
Yeah. I was like, don't even ask him about the post. He wants to be cryptic and weird, let him be. If he's got something to say to you, he's going to have to use words. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, so that's so freaking powerful, especially the Jonah Hill scenario, because I'd never heard or thought about a boundary being a manipulative tactic. And as you broke that down, I assume then for people at home as well, there's the difference between doing that 6 months later and you know that you're attracted to their photos of them in a bathing suit and now that's the thing you're telling them to do, versus let's say you start dating someone and then all of a sudden, let's say she decides to be an OnlyFan.
Yep.
It's very different,
yes.
I assume.
Absolutely. Because you didn't meet them that way. That would have to be a conversation. Now, it's a conversation, not, can I get your permission? When you're in a relationship, I asked my husband, how do you feel about me doing this thing that's going to take me to Australia for 2 weeks? Would you be willing to come with me for a week? How do you feel? It's going to be the summer though. So how is that? Like, how do you feel? Because we're partners. If he's like, Tara, it's a bad time because of something, I'd say, okay, let me see if there's a way we can do it a different time of year. Or he'll say, it's not a great time, but go without me. It's okay. Go. I understand. This is a great opportunity for you, right? So we'll work it out. So I think that the communication aspect is so important too, to be able to work it out. But if someone is going to suddenly be what is it, OnlyFans?
OnlyFans, yeah.
They're going to make an OnlyFans account. I think that certainly is something that you might want to have a conversation about. Because the same way, if your partner is doing something that impacts you, because that could impact them. It's like my husband goes into war zones he's an artist, and so he's a visual journalist, it's called, where he'll go into hot war zones at times and draw what's happening. Wow. So that's a conversation. He's a grown-up. This is his dharma. This is what he does. So even though he was like, can I go? In the beginning, when this all started happening like 15 years ago, I was like, I'm super not the boss of you, dude. He's like, but how do you feel? I was like, listen, my question to you is, how do you feel? And he's like, oh, it's a dream come true. I'm like, then you must do it. And I will manage my feelings, right? Am I worried you're going into a war zone? Yeah, I am. Can I tolerate that for you to do your heart's desire? Yes, I can. Would I have felt different if our kids weren't grown? If I had little kids? Maybe. But these are the types of conversations where we consider what the other person feels without using the way that they feel about us as a manipulation tactic, right? Like if I didn't want him to go, he wouldn't have gone. Like that's a fact. But I was like, and my kids, they were grown at the time then, right? Because I married a widower, so my kids are older. And they were like, how are you letting dad go to Iraq? Like, what if he gets blown up? And I was like, babe, I love dad. You know who I don't own? Dad. Like, how do you think dad will feel about me? If I manipulate him into not going because I'm afraid, and then he doesn't do it, and he's had like a beautiful experience from doing it, So it's about ownership too, that healthy relationships, we really get like we're journeying together, and what a beautiful, amazing opportunity. But it really isn't, even being married, I don't see it myself as ownership. I see it as a commitment to being co-pilots. Like I want to be securely tethered and completely free.
That's so cool. I love that. So what about though, if you've been in a relationship for a while, and I'm just going to keep on the Jonah Hill thing because it's so powerful. Yeah. I do understand and very clear about the difference where you're setting a boundary, which isn't really a boundary, it's more of a control element in order to change them. But as you change, right, when you're in a relationship for a while, you hope that you change, right? I'm such a advocate for a growth mindset. So I'm not the person I was last year, and I'm not, hopefully won't be the same person I am next year. And so your preferences are going to change. Your wants, your needs, your desires may evolve and change. So how do you then start to set new boundaries? And what is then that difference between setting a new boundary later on in a relationship that maybe you were fine with when you first met them?
Oh, such a good question. So for this exact thing, when I counsel couples, or back in the day when I was doing a lot of couples work, I would have couples do it's basically a couple's vision. So every year, annually, we revisit the couple's vision. And we also would meet every other week for what I call the State of the Union, basically, where we're asking, how are we doing? What's good? What can we work on? So we start with gratitudes, right? Every other week. And my husband and I, we just do it Sunday mornings in bed because it's easy breezy, coffee, New York Times, and talking. Because usually my husband he's such a workaholic. He's all like, get up. And so on Sundays, I'm like, 2 hours, you're not getting up. We're staying here. And really it's checking in, like, how are we doing? Because you are going to change. Hopefully, I pray, right? This is what we want to do. So if you have a couple's vision, this is when you talk about how do we see ourselves spending our money? Like, do we share money? Do we not share money? Where do we want to spend? If we do have money that we can spend, do we want to travel? Are we on the same page there? If you change your mind, sometimes, right, you change. Like my husband wanted to get animals and like turn like my house into a farm, basically. And that wasn't originally in the plan.
You have geese.
We do, and we had chickens and we're getting a rooster. Like we got our own eggs. It's lovely. But that was in one of our couple's visions, our annual conversations. He was like, how do you feel about this? I know it wasn't the plan. And then I was like, if you love it, if you really want to do it, we can do it. So again, how do you address it? So those are more structured ways of addressing it. And then we have the more day-to-day ways of addressing when your boundary has changed. So let's give an example. Let's say that maybe you were willing to, I don't know, let's just say do your partner's laundry, let's just say. And then maybe you got to a point where you don't feel like doing that anymore. Or we could say this with kids too, with like teenagers, maybe you don't feel like doing it anymore. Then you have to have a conversation that says, hey, I know for all these years, I've been willing to do this, and I'm actually changing and wanting more of my downtime to be my own. So I actually am going to hand this back to you to do. Now and that is a boundary, right? Because you're gaining back energy, time, bandwidth, and sort of pushing it back to the other person. And that may be a conversation. Maybe your partner saw you doing their laundry as like a part of their love language, and maybe their feelings will be hurt. So there needs to be a conversation about that. Maybe you used to think it was okay that your partner was in touch with their ex, let's just say, but maybe they've developed a relationship that feels threatening to you, and maybe you don't like that. So let's think about, can we brainstorm? I'm feeling threatened by this. It feels like your ex is taking space in a part of your life, your heart, that I feel like should only be mine. What can we do? If you have a healthy relationship, you can have a conversation. Maybe your partner says, well, I've invited you to come with us, but you always say no. What if you came with us and you had your own relationship with her, right? Like there's ways that we can problem solve, and you're allowed. One of the Boundary Boss Bill of Rights is I'm allowed to make mistakes, course correct, or change my mind, which includes changing your boundaries.
That's such a beautiful breakdown. And so even it's the discussion piece versus the control and command and demand, I should say.
Yes, exactly. It's bringing it to the conversation. This is how I'm feeling. I'm having this thought. What are your thoughts about this? Or I'd like to make a simple request, right? It can be very easy language that you let me know if you're going to be late, or whatever the thing is that is now bothering you. Perhaps it didn't used to bother you, but now your partner's coming late all the time, and maybe it is bothering you, or maybe it used to bother you, but you didn't have the courage to say anything about it. You're allowed to change your mind, course correct, and say, hey, I'd like to make a simple request that if you're going to be late, you let me know, because when you don't, it really makes me feel unimportant to you. It like hurts my feelings in a way.
What up, homie? I got something free and new to share with you right now.
How often are you visited by that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, experienced enough, not fill in the blank? One of the most powerful things you can learn to do in life is to turn that negative voice into your bestie. And I want to teach you how to do that and so much more in my 4 Steps to Becoming Confident workshop. And guys, the most amazing thing is you can actually register for completely free for this workshop. So click the link on your screen and I'll see you on the inside. And it could be potentially just a season of your life, because as you were talking, I was like, oh, it's interesting because my husband, we got so busy about 1.5 years ago that he went from working, let's say, a 90-hour week to a 120-hour week. And I was okay at the beginning, but over time, I started to feel that distance. And so I said, look, I'm starting to feel the distance. I would like it if you actually came up to the bedroom and we just hung out for an hour before bed. And I don't need it every night, so maybe we'll do like Tuesdays and Fridays or something like that. And so I broke that down to him. But then we ended up, he now works a bit less. He only works like 100 hours a week. And so now I actually don't feel that need as much. And so I've even said to him like, oh, when I requested you come up to the bedroom that we get to spend time together, I'm actually okay now. I don't need it. If I do need it again, I'll bring it up to you.
Yeah. And how did he respond?
Oh, amazingly well.
Right, but the thing is, he responds to your concern. So in a healthy relationship, we're able to voice our concerns or our desires or where we feel unsatisfied. And the other person, rather than being super defensive, can be like, how you feel matters. let's figure it out. Let's brainstorm it. And this is something that if you're not doing it in your relationship right now, don't feel bad, because a lot of people don't do it. You can learn how to establish boundaries, negotiate for your needs, but you have to assert yourself. And I think this is the thing that's missing with so many women in particular, is the fear of asserting themselves, because there's a fear of being rejected or being shut down. And sometimes we just have to feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yeah, I used to be the person as well, and I even identified in myself what I was doing, but I would say to him a little sometimes snide comments like, "Oh yeah, I don't really see you anymore," and I realized. So again, like I'm not perfect, and I want to make sure that in having explained all of that, it actually came about as a result of me realizing that I was being somewhat a little passive aggressive and kind of dropping a bit of hints, making him feel a little bad about him. You know, it was like I was like, "Oh, that actually isn't nice," and it doesn't make him feel good. It definitely doesn't make me feel good. So what's a better strategy? Like I'm such a tactical I love strategy in that, like, okay, I'm not getting what I want. Now he feels bad. I feel bad because I'm such a people pleaser. So I was like, oh God, I just feel so bad that I made him feel guilty. And it was this freaking horrifying spiral. And so that's where I got to, okay, let me just explain to him. And then it ended up being beautiful.
But how amazing, though, you really make a great distinction, because how many people watching or listening drop the hint, drop the snide comment, say the thing, well, must be nice to get to sleep in, instead of being like, tomorrow, can you get up with the baby so I can sleep in, right? Actually asking for what you want and what you need, and being okay. Like our people are gonna have limitations, right? But if we don't assert ourselves, if we don't ask for what we want, most of the time we won't get it, right? Because our partners don't read our minds. People in general can't read our minds. So again, the passive aggressive dropping the hints doesn't work, because people don't pick up on it, or it works to only make the other person feel bad or resentful at you for dropping the hint, but not like, it's not reparative. It doesn't actually get you what you want. It's not effective, as you're saying. It's so much more effective to learn to communicate directly, knowing that you can always do it with love and kindness. We can always do it with a smile. A lot of times I use humor when I need to say something to someone, because it doesn't have to be this really serious, terrible thing. And even if I'm talking about myself, like I'll use humor. Like, I don't know, sometimes I can be insecure, even if it's true. Even if I am feeling insecure, I'll be like, I need some reassurance right now. I'll ask my husband, and even 25 years later, which of course he's like, okay, what can I do? But saying it and almost like calling myself out saves all this time and energy of me feeling unsatisfied and then resentful. And it's like a cycle that doesn't work. So direct communication and the language of boundaries is so important in this.
And I realize I don't want someone to do it because they're now resentful, or they're sensing my resentfulness, or because they feel badly. That isn't actually a healthy way to get somebody to act in the way that maybe you want. So like, I want my husband to come up early. Like, I don't want him to do it out of guilt or shame. I actually want him to do it because it's like, oh, my wife just told me, like, it would really be meaningful to her. Now he feels good about himself by doing it. Not because then if he was to come up, Terry, and he'll be like, okay, I'm here, it's 8 o'clock, I'd be like, I feel really bad now he's doing that out of obligation. So now I feel bad. And so you still don't get what you want, even though you kind of do get what you want.
Yes, exactly. A lot of my clients will say, I want him to think of it himself. And I always say, no, that is a recipe for disaster. That is saying he needs to have some crystal ball, which he doesn't have. It's letting the person fulfill the need once you have the courage to ask for it, allowing them to do it. And hopefully they're receiving it with love, and you're sending it with love. But I agree with you. It's like, if we shame someone into doing it, it doesn't feel good. Even when it gets delivered, it's like,
Yeah, it's so true. And then earlier you said about how people will use boundaries as, or Jonah Hill specifically, but there are other people, it's very common that people may do this as a way of being like a coercive way of doing it. What other types of coercive behaviors exist that we may not be aware of?
I mean, there can be coercive control with money, right? Where someone has the power over you because they have the power over the purse strings. And I see this in extended families a lot. Like, it can happen with extended families and wealthy families, where it's like grandpa will buy you an apartment on Fifth Avenue. But that means every time grandpa wants anything from you,
You got to show up.
you got to show up and do it. Or he expects you to go on a family vacation twice a year. You know what I mean? I had a client who was in that situation. And I was like, here's the thing about coercive control with money. Most of the time, money, someone else giving you money, even family money, is not free. So unless it's very healthy, and there's very healthy ways that money can get transferred through trusts and where it's not a manipulation, but I've seen it being very coercive. What about with sex? Someone coercively saying, if you don't have sex with me, you don't love me. If you don't have sex with me, I'm breaking up with you. If you don't do this thing that I want you to do, even though you feel uncomfortable, I don't know why you don't want to do it. My ex used to do it, right? And it's coercion because there's got to be some implied threat, right, of coercive control, like you're going to lose something, whether I'm going to break up with you if you don't do it, or whether grandpa's not going to buy you the apartment if you don't do it, or even coercive control just in shaming someone, right, where if you don't do this, then you're a bad person. Coercive control also where you might bring in someone else. And that's also just manipulation where you might be like, I mean, I didn't want to say anything, but Bob also thinks you're off the rails. Like Bob's with me on this. I mean, I wasn't going to say anything, but he mentioned it to me. So making you feel like if you don't do the thing that not only does your partner think you're nuts, but so does everyone else.
And would they do that? Would they do that in public as well, like around other people? It's like, yeah, she wouldn't do this, or
Absolutely. That's another form of public shaming. So it's like you don't want to be embarrassed. So they ask you to, they make you sort of agree to something in front of other people because they're embarrassing you, trying to embarrass you.
And so what does that do then from a psychological standpoint?
All of this, any of these manipulation tactics that we've talked about in this episode, coercion, coercive control, it is so dehumanizing to the person experiencing it. It just scratches away at your sense of self, one experience at a time, where you can really get to a point where you literally don't even know who you are, because someone who is manipulating you in that way, you really ultimately start feeling like you really are a bad person. You really are losing it, right? If someone is gaslighting you and like really messing with your reality, I've had clients come in really being like, I don't know what's real and what's not real, because I'll have a conversation with my partner, they'll agree to something, and then 3 days later, they'll be like, I never said that. And you're like, do I need to record to convert? Like, am I losing my mind? And when someone is really gaslighting you, someone is really manipulating you, they will absolutely boldface lie. They will absolutely just lie to continue to have that control over you.
And what do you encourage in those situations with your clients when they say that?
First of all, tell someone. First and foremost, talk to people, because what ends up happening is the isolation. People who are very manipulative have this skill of like getting you away from the people in your life because you're embarrassed. You could feel embarrassed that like you're putting up with this crap. You know it's bad, but you're afraid. So you protect the abuser. You don't want to tell anybody. Not to mention because you know they're going to tell you to leave and you don't feel like you can. So it's really a double bind. I think that talk to someone non-judgmental. Ask them to not give you any input. You just want them to know that you're really in pain about this and what's really happening in your relationship. Secrecy is really, this breeds so much shame, as Brené Brown talks about. So we don't want it to be a secret. That's the beginning. And I think you have to be real about, are you loved in this relationship? Do you feel loved? Or do you know, listening to this, maybe this is your wake-up call, that you feel trapped? That's how you feel. Because love and pain do not have to do this. Love and fear do not have to be intertwined in this way that they are in toxic relationships. But it doesn't have to be like that. You don't deserve it. I'm telling you, love does not have to hurt in that way, right? Of course, we hurt each other in a normal way, but in the way abusive relationships, you're in so much pain all the time. You're so afraid all the time. There's no rest when you're in a bad relationship like that because it's so scary. But you don't deserve that. So talk to someone. And honestly, if you know it's time to go, make a very private plan to leave. And I have a whole, we can put it in the show notes, I have a whole episode of my podcast on how to safely leave an abusive relationship. Do not tell anyone, meaning the trusted person, yes, but do not advertise it to the partner, right? You want to keep everything close to your chest because that's the way to stay the safest.
Terri, we've just touched the surface of all the things that's in your amazing workbook. Where can people find you and then the Boundary Boss workbook?
They can actually find this at boundarybossworkbook.com or amazon.com. So really buy it on Amazon and then go and get your bonuses because we have a whole bunch of beautiful bonuses for people. I really think that people are going to love this book. I'm very proud of it.
If you've ever been betrayed or triggered, then keep watching to learn how to control your emotions.
I lived my whole life from my shoulders up, whether it was always analyzing the racing thoughts that I have, endless self-analysis, and then over time becoming so overwhelmed by that, I just completely checked out and my mind went blank. And it was as if there was no body from the shoulders down for me. And a lot of us can enter into thinking, overanalyzing, and misinterpret and think that what we're doing is, I'm being conscious. And again, conscious is a state of observation. It's actually not a state of endless critical thinking, judging, self-analysis, trying to convince our way out of emotions at all. Again, understanding that though is a adaptation. Chances are that was a safer space, my mind, than spending time in that body. So when I talk about consciousness, it's learning not only how to be the observer. I break down very accordingly to the 3 sections of the book. We talk about body consciousness in that whole first section and how can I begin to tune in to my body? Can I use my breath as a hook of my attention? Can I use my sensations? I mean, I'm sitting in a very nice, comfortable chair right now. Can I actually simply tune into how it feels to be in my, Nicole's body in this chair? That might sound so simplistic for listeners, but for those of us who spend so much time in our minds, distracted, disconnected, actually turning attention to what it feels like, my thighs, my back, these lovely cushions, is a big shift of consciousness. And once I begin to consistently make that shift into my body, what then I will be met with likely is all of the sensations that I've accumulated over time. Because even if we've gotten very good at being distracted, at being disconnected, at not thinking that we're feeling anything because we're not paying attention to it, it doesn't mean that our body hasn't been accumulated it. And the reason, again, that we've probably shifted our focus for so long was because it's too uncomfortable in this body. So learning how to notice when I'm in my spaceship, in my balloon, endlessly thinking, distracting myself with thoughts, whatever it might be, and then learning in that moment to make that most empowering choice, which is, okay, let me safely focus on my body. Let me ground my attention. Let me feel my heels on the ground. Let me feel my back on the chair. Let me pay attention to how I'm breathing in this moment. And now I'm consciously present in my body. And of course, we want to practice that over and over and over again so that we can really begin to not only reconnect with our body, but over time, the safer we feel paying attention to it, the more then conscious will become of all of those underlying sensations.
Oh, I love that. That's so tactical, which is beautiful. As you were talking, I was like, how much of our senses have been conditioned? So like the hearing, right? When you hear someone shout, it triggers you because of childhood. As you were talking, so even with where you're doing your senses, you're touching the sofa, you're smelling the air, right? I know becoming aware has a lot to do with what are you seeing, what are you smelling, what are you touching, what are you feeling? And as you were talking, I was like, but what if we've been conditioned for that to be actually a negative thing? Like, how do we start to shine attention on the fact that we were conditioned to think of a smell in a certain way?
Yes, 100%. And the reality of it is our memory in general, and especially when we're talking about trauma memory, it's not language-based.
Right.
It is sensory-based.
Yes.
And I'm sure many listeners probably have even had that experience of walking by and smelling that cologne or that waft of aroma from that person in your past who hurt you, and now you might as well be back in interaction with that person. My heart is racing. I feel nervous. Of course, I'm using a much more stressful past experience, but you're absolutely right, Lisa, in terms of we have these imprints that are often sensory based, and then we carry that with us so much so that any similar smell, sound, taste, sensation of any sort actually brings us back in time, right? And then we live the visceral, likely dysregulation, reactivity, attempt to keep ourselves safe as if we are that younger year person, whatever it was. And so to speak to your point, understanding that we have, and this is, I think, why trauma in and of itself and any of our emotional memories really are difficult for a lot of us to put into words. Not only do they happen at a time when some of us are actually pre-verbal, like before we even have the capability to express language, but very much like I was describing, kind of the way our senses are stored in our brain, the way our emotional memories, or where I should say our emotional memories are stored in our brain. Of course, there's not one area. Many areas of our brain light up at one point for one functioning, but none of them are language based. They're all sensory. So again, knowing in those moments, exploring for ourselves, what are sensations that might activate, trigger, whatever word you like to use, but bring up that deeper stuff, transporting us back in time. Of course, gifting us then not only compassion, I can understand maybe why walking past that perfume counter really caused that visceral reaction in me, but now I can open the opportunity for some more of that somatic work, because now I know that my body, my emotional brain is activated, and I know I'm feeling unsafe as a result, and now I can make some choices to create some safety in my now moment.
Because I love that, because I was just thinking about, when you get with somebody, if you've had a bad experience, especially in a relationship, these other sensories can start to rear their ugly heads, if you will, with a new partner. If like the cologne's such a beautiful one, actually, because there's, I think, isn't it like the sensory in the nose, there's no filter, it goes straight to the brain. So that's the one that you can't even logistically like try and convince yourself otherwise.
Yeah, our sense of smell is really connected to the emotional memory sensation, and it really kind of, it bypasses a gate, a sensory gate too. So in terms of the imprint, I think most of us will feel that one strongly, but I'll make even a bigger global statement here. Even outside of our senses, the reality of it is most of us are cycling in past memories in our way of being, in our relationships, similar experiences, whether or not it's, that smell that's activating this, really traumatic incident. A lot of us are operating in our relationships in general based on our past relationship, projecting, our parent figures in so many ways onto our current partners, and not necessarily seeing the objective reality of the differences in them.
Oh my God, is that trauma bond?
That is trauma.
So if you can take us actually from the trauma that happens as a kid, how that ends up being a trauma bond as adults, because it's such a awakening, I think, to the decisions we make, the choices we make, and then why we make them.
Yeah, so we'll start by a trauma bond. Very generally, or at least the definition that I like to offer for a trauma bond is our very habitual, patterned way of relating in our relationships or to other people. And with the idea being that much of it is conditioned, or again, that same dynamic pattern, the same way I had to show up for mom, dad, or whomever was my core caregiver in childhood, usually then becomes that same role that I adopt into my adulthood. And what if we didn't have, a safe, grounded caregiver with their own sense of self or separation, different needs, able to then ground themselves through their emotions, allowing them to be present to us as a separate individual, being curious, helping us meet consistently the needs that we have in childhood, which we're dependent on them to meet for us. So that's a really, really tall order. I pretty much just described what I like to call a unicorn, because I've yet to find, a human who's really had that level of caregiving, because it's very difficult. So many of us are raised, in families that are transmitting intergenerational patterns or just simply ways of being. So much of it is influenced by ideas of parenting. I mean, there was up until recently a brand of parenting that would profess that children are literally to be seen, not heard. They don't have emotional needs. Literally just keep them alive like a plant in the corner. And that's all that's necessary. I mean, this was a brand of parenting that,
I grew up in that era.
right? That, advisors, doctors would have said, yes, that's exactly how we treat children. And obviously now we know different. So I'm not minimizing or shaming parents by any stretch of the imagination. I'm actually, what I believe is offering the very human reasons why very few of us had that caregiving. So what happens is, because we're dependent, we need these people to literally keep us physically alive at minimum. If they don't even want to acknowledge emotional need, our body needs someone to keep us alive. We're so attuned and adaptive that we will keep that connection at whatever cost to ourselves, meaning we will always show up in service of that relationship with that parent to get whatever little bit of love they can give us, even if that means squashing certain aspects of ourselves. And because very few of us had parents who were emotionally mature or able to tend to themselves, their emotions, and create that separation, so many of us grew up as an extension of our parents, right? Of a need that indirectly us showing up by maybe suppressing our emotions, maybe being the kid with no problems, never causing an issue, or maybe being the caretaker for our parent. Habitually over time, we do that enough, we actually think that that's how we connect to other people. That's how we once kept ourselves safe. We define that as love, as a relationship, and before we know it, we continue on and seek that same pattern with our partners until, of course, we become conscious and we see, again, the role we're playing, how we're relating to others, what needs we're bringing to the table, what needs we're not bringing to the table, and of course, make some changes. But simply, trauma bonds come from our childhood experiences, our childhood circumstances, where our best solution for most of us was to adapt in some way, to meet a need, to play a role, to squash ourselves in some way to maintain that connection, because that's familiar, because that's how we need it to stay safe. We continue to repeat that even though at our core we feel disconnected, unfulfilled, and unsatisfied ultimately.
God, it's heartbreaking, but thank you for breaking that down so eloquently. And I believe you also talk about emotional need entanglement. Talk to me about that and how that really does show up in people's lives with everything that we're talking about the thing that you take from younger childhood, so that people right now can really start to understand themselves. And that's what I freaking love about your book, is you're really trying to help people just like understand who you are, why you do the things you do, the habits, and then how we can work through them is so freaking beautiful. So yeah, if you can talk to me about that.
Yeah, emotional need entanglement. I mean, very much like the name says, it's when the emotional needs, often of two people, it could be a whole system, get merged together. Now, of course, when we're in relationship with someone, it's a space to honor needs, to go for support. But ultimately, there needs to be a point of separation, of distinction between I'm me, a separate, unique individual, and you, Lisa, are you, a separate, unique individual. And many of us who grew up in families who didn't have that separation, or who are enmeshed is another word, or codependent, we lacked that. What begins to happen is needs are met or entangled through another human, right? So by showing up, by keeping, say, mom or dad or whomever it was in your family, as happy as possible, as grounded as possible, as peaceful as possible, oftentimes by squashing our emotions in a certain moment, we become entangled. So my servicing you and your needs actually does have the byproduct of meeting my need, but it's through you, in a sense. So we've entangled ourselves. We haven't created that distinction. And the reality of our emotions is that they are very individual experiences. While they feel like they come from the outside world, and of course they are activated in our relationships, we do need that separation.
How much of that happens in, because this may come as a shock of a question, but the reason why I'm asking is because my audience asks me a lot about narcissistic mothers. I get asked a lot now about narcissistic mothers, and to really talk about that. So when you talk about this emotional needed entanglement, as you were like, I was just thinking about this, that young child that has a narcissistic mother that grows up always trying to serve that need of the mother. How on earth do you start to identify it, break it, and separate yourself from it? Because especially when it comes to like a mother, you hope that they're always in your lives. But when it's a narcissistic mother, there can become this tricky part of, in order to distance yourself, doesn't that then trigger the mother?
Yes, and so a simple way, what I really view narcissism as is a function or a byproduct of survival mode. And we all become I-focused when we are fighting for our proverbial or, survival. And a narcissistic parent of any kind, whether it's a mother or a father, feels so unsafe, insecure, likely again because of their environments that they grew up in, lacking a sense of self, literally becomes survival focused. So it's not often of an ill intent that I think a lot of narcissistic or people with that label, get kind of painted as. In my opinion, it's actually a survival mode that, again, I'm going to go maybe say something a bit controversial here, that we can all slip into and do when we're in that unsafe reactive state. And I'll speak from myself. When I'm screaming and yelling at someone that I absolutely love, you better believe I'm only focused on myself, at creating safety for myself. I've actually dehumanized. I don't even see my partner, whoever I'm yelling at, as a person in that moment. And that's just a little example of slipping in and out. And of course, I think that those of us that are deeming our parents as like the narcissistic parent likely are always self-focused, which does mean that the emotional climate, revolves around this human. The needs of the home, kind of everyone is servicing, making sure that other person's needs are getting met. And usually, again, it's at the consequence of ourself, of what we want. But I really do view narcissism as a self-focused, survival-based mechanism where that person is only trying to literally maintain their survival, often even at the expense of their children. And the byproduct of that, for being the child of that often, is we look outward and we might then continue to service, caretake, meet the needs of everyone around us, because at one time we had to do that to keep ourselves safe, to keep the explosions at a minimum, and then we keep repeating that, and oftentimes we're left with no idea, and this is again who I would imagine would be really helped by the workbook, who we are, what we need. We've lost ourselves in the service of someone else.
And that's what you suggest in going inwards, doing the internal work, so that you can actually start to identify what are the needs that you have and then start serving yourself, like you said. Because that was the thing that I was thinking through as you were talking. It's like so many, and I get it. Like I'm very honest with my parents, right? And I'm just like, I really want you to be proud of me. Like that's the thing. Like before you die, I want you to hear you say that you're proud of me, because that is the thing that I just strive for. It makes me feel good about myself. Now, my parents have said that many times, but when I think about if you have a parent that may have some narcissistic traits, I know that a lot of people would be like, we just pigeonhole everyone now as a narcissist. So I actually understand that not everyone's a narcissist. If you have traits, if you will, I'm just going to, again, presume that people are like me that want to have their parents proud of them or want them to be, happy. When you have a parent like what you just said, where it's like they're doing the best they can, sometimes they're just in like that scarcity, that fearful mode. How do you start to disconnect that? Like, because do you have to actually give up the notion that your parents are ever going to be proud of you, that they're ever going to be satisfied, they're ever going to give you the pat on the back, and now you just have to do the internal work? Like, do you have to actually completely disconnect from that?
I think it's natural. I think most of us, we want pride from our loved ones. We want to know or have the idea that we matter at minimum, right, to these loved ones. So I think it's really natural to have, especially when it's our parents that we're talking about, to have that inner desire. So we can hold space, for that wanting that we have, and also maybe hold space for the reality, because now the very difficult, honest conversation around what power we have to change another applies, which is very limited, right? So we can wish our parents to offer us those validation or those moments of pride or even moments of connection or even just seeing us, because I think that's often what happens. We don't feel seen for who we are, especially when we have a narcissistic parent that actually can't shift out of their own focus to see, us for themselves ultimately. And so holding space for then the reality and knowing that we might not get that validation from someone, and then giving ourselves perhaps the opportunity to give it to ourselves. And a prime example, and while it's a bit different than validation, I love having the idea or having the feeling that I'm considered. all of this comes back to childhood, where I felt very limited moments of being considered unless I was performing, and having that moment of like having someone, see me, do something, acknowledge me is something that I deeply, deeply want. I now know my pattern enough and know that when that desire is really active for me, it's an invitation, of course, maybe to outwardly ask for my need directly to be met, for that active consideration of validation from a partner, a loved one, a parent, whoever it is. And in the occasion where that human can't or won't provide that for me for whatever multitude of reasons why someone might not be able to or choose to show up for me in that moment, I now have the opportunity to know that that's a marker that I can, an invitation for me to provide that to myself. Because again, going back to the normal humanness of these needs, I think a lot of us are like, well, just squash it down. I shouldn't need validation for me. I shouldn't need to be considered. In reality, I've learned that when I'm feeling that actively, I do actually need to be considered. It just might not come, or that person that I want it from might not be available, but I'm available. So I use that now as a moment or an opportunity for me to ask myself, well, okay, Nicole, if you're so desperate for consideration, is it possible that you're feeling like last on your priority list? Are you not maybe showing up for yourself? Yes, ideally, maybe you want your loved one, your parent, whoever it is, to offer you that validation, that consideration. And if they're not available, can I gift myself with that?
So I'm always thinking, how do you set yourself up for success? Because in those moments, sometimes you get emotional, right? Where it's like, it's hard to go from, oh, hey, baby, and then they dismiss you to you go, okay, well, I'm just going to go fit in myself. Like in that moment, you just feel freaking dismissed. And so how do you go to then, all right, right now I'm feeling dismissed, right? Like in real time, how do you process that? And do you have like a cheat sheet or something that you can go to? It's like, I feel dismissed, crap, what am I going to do? Go for a walk, got it.
I'm laughing because in reality, my moments of aha realization usually occur after I've thrown a temper tantrum, I've asked someone to come hug me, but held my arm up, my dagger's out, and don't let them near me. And so moments of clarity for me still aren't in real time, but giving ourselves the space, the awareness to dive deeper can be the beginning of the journey.
I love that you said that, because that is so important. I really need people to really freaking hear that, because here you are, you've done the work, right? You've written amazing books, you live your life in this space, and yet even you saying, look, it's still freaking hard, I have to do it after, is so aligning. I really hope people hear that. Guys, honestly, hear the words that came out of my mouth. Don't seek perfection. Hear that you can learn it. Hear that you can evolve. I am so sorry. I just had to say that. Thank you for being that honest.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the reality, especially when we're talking about these core reactive spaces. Those will be the last to change. It's a gift to give yourself that post-play where you're able to dive in, right? Because that's where it will begin. Ideally, we learn to be more conscious and to make those different choices in real time. Though, again, the reality of it is this is wired into our neurobiology, quite literally. My body is already beginning to activate me, and I'm already interpreting, and all my systems and juices are off to the races before I even catch on to, oh my gosh. And again, that speaks to the point of the more consistently conscious we are, the more we can make different choices before we lose that control.
Right.
So for me, it even includes like day to day, right? When I go through periods like this, especially I'm promoting this workbook. So I'm traveling, I'm not sleeping as well. That means that my resources are generally lower. It's going to make it harder in those moments then to catch myself. When I'm firing on all cylinders, I'm, taking care of my body, I'm getting the sleep I need, I'm getting the movement I need, I'm getting the nutrients I need, I'm breathing calmly and deeply all the time, then those are the moments where I might be more likely in real time to notice as my stress gets amplified, because that's usually what we're noticing first. Notice as my heart rate and I start to tense, as I'm starting to create, and send myself down that old path, and then make a new choice then. We attempt to notice when we're already so knee-deep, locked and loaded and emotionally reactive that we're not setting ourselves up to succeed, or we're not doing anything to care for our body outside of those moments, and then expecting, some breath work to work, or this conversation to come to top of mind the next time you're getting ready to scream, and you to remember to do what Dr. Nicole said. And that's just so unrealistic that we need to set ourselves up to succeed consistently, which means creating that consistent relationship where I can notice I'm depleted. I'm stressed out. So when I now go home and return to my partners, right, after a trip like this, I might not have that bandwidth. I might need to go and take care of myself and ground myself and get some rest, or I might find myself reactive in those moments.
Oh my God, this is so good. Like, the reason why this is so, like, amazing, and what you're saying is, it's this predictability. It's know thyself, don't judge thyself, right? So it's like, oh, I know myself well enough to know that when I travel, I'm going to get less sleep. When I get less sleep, I'm more irritable. When I'm more irritable, something's going to trigger me quicker, right? And just now, when you're about to book a trip, then you know you're gonna be like, oh, like being aware of, I'm gonna be more susceptible now to being triggered. I'm gonna be more susceptible now to feeling a certain way, to feeling dismissed. And so at least almost just warning yourself is a beautiful thing to do. And I love that so much. And I also liken this to like knowing our cycles, knowing our hormones, right? Because exactly what you're saying, if we can lose our shit because we're hangry, right? Because we're just like, we're so hungry that we get angry. Now think about how we show up, if our hormones, if it's the beginning of our cycle versus the end of our cycle, if we've had the stacking effect of not eating, not sleeping, traveling, maybe having a bad experience, something's failed, and now imagine someone comes to you and even remotely like skates around your triggers, you're going to be way more likely to have that eruption.
Right. And the reality, and again, why the workbook even begins with those body type habits is so few of us are caring for our body for many different reasons. We don't even think we need to, or that's part of this conversation around emotions. Before we even go into the part 2 around the whole emotional world, it's again understanding that we do have a body, and that is very much something that we need to care for. And I'm speaking from myself, who sleep was never a priority. I was eating inflammatory foods all of the time, for me. And so my whole resting state was a state of depletion. So everything I was doing, going about my day, I was living in that cycle of reactivity. I actually had no chance to be calm, to be grounded, to make new choices, to be in alignment, because none of my resources were ever met, unbeknownst to me, because half of this information, I didn't even know that it was important to take care of my body. I didn't realize the role that our gut plays. I didn't realize the role that our nervous system plays, which is, again, why with my first book, I was so passionate about getting that information out there so that we can know, and then we can start to not only make those choices to set ourselves up to succeed, but to give ourselves the grace in those moments, because some things are outside. When when we're going through moon cycles, when we're going through our cycles, right? I notice very much shifts and changes along with that too, in terms of my sleep and my overall stress-based resources, and that will then lead to more moments of reactivity.
Where do body beliefs lie in everything that we're talking about now, about getting yourself grounded?
Yeah, so what we think about our body is so much as well grounded in the experiences that we had. How were bodies modeled in our homes, right? Were bodies a comfortable part of day-to-day existence? Did we see caregivers who tended and cared for their body? Did we see maybe the quite opposite? Bodies weren't even talked about. I know for me, there was never nudity in my home. There was never conversation around body or changes like in the human development. None of that was discussed with me. It was as if we were all walking around afraid of a body becoming ill. That was very present, but we never actually talked about tending to a body. So how we care for our body is going to impact what we think of it. Also how we hear other people talking about our body, about their bodies. They might give us the best advice to care for our body, but maybe we have a caregiver who's so shaming of their own body, always on a diet, always self-critical, always trying to modify it in some way. They might be praising our body, but again, we're going to be impacted by the shame that we see reflected in how they're caring for their bodies. So what we think about our body is very much grounded often in the experiences that we had around bodies in general, our body in general, and then it goes to inform how we care for our body growing up. If I've learned, it's not surprising that, like I just shared with you, I didn't care for my body at all. I wasn't taught to. I was taught that a body only gets sick. I wasn't taught how to care for wellness in a body. So it's not surprising that I was entering my 30s and I had very limited care for my body. I had a lot of shame around my body. Again, not seeing a body being honored, being appreciated, seeing very much criticism around dieting. I saw my mom and my sister diet. I saw very negative comments. My mom made comments to me when she would see my weight fluctuating. So not only was I disconnected from my body, I didn't think very favorable about it at all. I'm actually quite shameful. And all of this came from how I saw bodies related, tended to, and how I experienced my own body in relationship with those around me.
Wow, how old were you when your mom did that?
My entire life. My mom very much based in her own, conditioning. I'm sure what she saw from her mother was always commenting. Interestingly enough, it was very confusing because while she would so quickly, assess when I've, gained weight or whatever it might be and comment on that, she would just as quickly then too comment on not taking seconds at dinner, because she very much learned one of the main ways my mom connected in absence of connecting emotionally with us, her children, was by providing, always having the dinner on the table, providing food, baking my favorite cupcakes. So very confusing. And I think this really illustrates some of the messaging we get, right?
Yeah.
Watch your body, but eat to love me at the same time. And then all of this got mixed up, confused in terms of I still see moments not only where I'm shameful of my body, but where I reward my body, myself, my achievements with food. Very much like my mom, or I tried to connect with other people around. Of course, culturally, I think that's a different conversation in terms of connecting, but in my family, it was the only point of connection.
Wow, and how did that impact your self-esteem?
Oh my gosh, I mean, our bodies, even if we're minimizing and distracting ourselves from the fact that we have them, I mean, they're part of ourselves, right? They're our reflection outward. We adorn them with clothes, right? So how we feel in our skin very much does translate to how we feel about our self, at least our physical self in general. Sometimes it washes over our entire self. So while I very much felt good when I was performing and achieving, at my core, there's a lot of shame, a lot of feelings of unworthiness, and a lot of it did factor in terms of how I felt about the vessel that I'm living in with. I mean, I avoided something I'll share really quickly because it has to do with the body. Growing up, I was in all different types of activities, athletics, artistic pursuits, dance here, there, everywhere. And I have a specific memory because all I wanted to do was dance as a kid. I was really interested in dancing. I wanted to be a jazz dancer in particular.
Oh my God, did you really?
Yes.
I had no idea.
So to take
jazz
dancer, I think probably it would have morphed into hip hop because now I'm
There
like, I feel
is.
that.
I'm a
but
girl.
at the neighborhood dance studio, it was jazz, tap, and ballet offered. Long story short, to get into jazz, you had to take 2 years of ballet, which was not of interest to me. And I was a little girl in the back of the ballet class playing softball at the same time, very much achieving at softball. And I have a memory, you have to wear, or we wore little leotards, and I had a bit of a belly. I now understand that as being a lot of times when we have a lot of cortisol from stress, it can show up in particularly belly weight. But of course, when I was looking at all the other little girls around me, they were all very tiny in their little leotards. And here I was with this belly. And if I'm being perfectly honest, I probably wasn't the best at dance. I was always kind of tucked into the back. And before long, I started to really dislike going to dance, so much so that I would complain, and I ended up quitting dance. I stopped going to dance, I think 2 years in, even though I think in terms of interest and, I think it really was something I probably would have pursued, but I think the self-consciousness of seeing and being in a body that not only didn't compare favorably, I was so uncomfortable in my own skin because of all of the overwhelming stressful feelings that I didn't have support in tending to. I quit dance in favor of being in a softball body where I was able to achieve. I felt better. I got better validation. So interestingly, I think for me, it had a bit of an impact even of shifting me out of possibly pursuing hobbies, passions, things that were of interest to me. And of course, now I'm getting back in my body and dancing around. So that for me is huge.
That's so cool. I love that story so much. And the reason why I really love it is because everything we're talking about, it's like, instead of stop beating ourselves up over where we are right now. Like, we are an accumulation of things that have happened in our past. We can't change it. I wish we could, we can't, until we figure out a DeLorean that we can go back in time, like, Marty McFly. And so instead of beating ourselves up over it, how can we take that as information for us to then be able to, hopefully today, getting your book, changing, really digging into who we are so that we can then show up to have the life we want. And you to sit here to say, look, this all stemmed from the fact that I think I was self-conscious in a leotard. I realized that why I made those decisions. But today, that doesn't sit well with me. And today, I've seen why. And I can change it. And I'm going to go do that dance class. Girl, I hope people freaking hear that. That is so amazing. And then as you were talking, also, I thought once upon a time, I would have been like, oh, it's our ego, right? Like our ego doesn't want to be bruised. But what I freaking love in your book, and literally it stopped me in my tracks. I was like, I'm going to put that on a Post-it note now, not to villainize our ego. And dude, I do that all the time. It's like, that bitch, like I call my ego my bitch. But I love that you actually said, don't villainize it. Talk to me about that. Talk to me about why we do villainize it, and then how we can actually turn it into a different message so that we can accept ourselves.
Yeah, so I think clarity a bit on ego, what it is, because I think traditionally, or a lot of us, when we hear ego, we think of that kind of narcissistic, right, self-focused, I'm better than thou, voice or way of being. And really an ego, really simply, as I often simplify things, is the story of us, like who we believe our identity to be, which again, as I'm sure you're not going to be surprised to hear, is grounded in how we've experienced ourselves and the meanings that we've made of our life and our experiences thus far. And again, grounded in our very real lived experience. We all are making meaning all of the time. If we drop in and pay attention to all the swirling thoughts in our mind, we're always trying to make sense of what's happening around us. And when we're younger, in that very early developmental state of dependency, something else that contributes, right, to this beginnings of our ego is the fact that we are developmentally immature so much that we can't understand all of the nuances and multidimensionality and factors that contribute to anyone's decision. So when things happen in our home, to us, in our relationships, the only way that our developmentally immature mind can make sense of it is egoic or I-based. I must have been the reason that mom left, dad left, that this person's not available to meet my needs, that I was abused. I must be bad, unworthy, wrong. There must be something to do with me. It gives us a bit of control. And again, we don't have the ability to zoom out. We don't have the maturity to be in a relationship and know all of the different factors that contribute to why we do things. Sometimes we don't even know what we do. We can only assume it's us.
Dude, sorry to interrupt you. Holy smoke, that is like a massive aha moment.
Yeah, what's going on?
This is so powerful, my God. So okay, so if I understand it, you're saying, hey, look, as kids, we just need meaning. Otherwise, it's just utter discomfort. We need to be grounded. So as a kid, you can't put all these things into place. So it's actually a defense mechanism for us to say it's us. That ego, which comes from the Greek word me, I, right? So it's the ego, ego. It just gives me an answer to find some grounding so that I don't feel dysregulated. But it's in that we've now identified it's us that then leads into our adulthood that makes it think it's about us.
Yeah, it gives us control too, right? Because if I can just not be bad in that way, maybe dad will come back. Maybe mom will stay. Maybe I won't get yelled at, screamed at, abused. Right? It gives us that semblance too of understanding, meaning, and control. It gives us something to do about it, right? And then I can adapt. Now I can change myself.
Right.
Now I can just show, right? For me, seeing a very stressed out household, there was only so much that the LePeras could take. So I felt that. I felt the complete overwhelm all the time. So I started to share less and less about me out of concern that it would stress the system, because that was the experience that I had, right? So I squash part of me. I assume that I'm, the straw that broke the camel's back every time. So if I just limit, and then I became described in my family as shy Nicole, secretive Nicole. Nicole never tells us anything. Nothing ever bothers Nicole. All of that was so far from the truth. But if I feel like I'm causing or contributing at least to this overwhelm that's completely destabilizing me, I can just stop causing it. I can just bring less of me to that table. So back to ego, what then happens over time, because we love to be right, because we also then have a part of our brain that colludes with this whole process called the reticular activating system, that to deal with the seemingly endless amount of stimuli that we just can't physically take in as a human being, we are always filtering and determining what is of personal relevance. And what's of personal relevance are our deep-rooted beliefs, who we think we are. We love to be right and confirm those. So before we know it, outside of our awareness, we delete everything from our existence that challenges our identity. We continue to operate based on this story of who we think we are, right? So I'm nothing bothers Nicole. Not surprising to hear that I became perfect partner Cole, never brought an issue, never asked for support in my relationships. I led with that same egoic way of being, and I felt challenged, right? Anytime I tried to operate or share anything out of that. So simply, an ego is a story of us, very much grounded in our lived experiences, often adaptations, how we think we've had to make, or how we've had to make sense of our life without all of the developmental awareness that then gets repeated and filtered, that we get so locked and loaded and sure of who we are into adulthood that, let's bring this full circle, we can become really reactive and defensive if we hear something outside of what we know to be true.
Dude, that is the most powerful way I've ever heard ego expressed. That's amazing. It's all just fit into place. Like every block, as you were saying, I was like, oh my God, it's making a beautiful picture now. And it actually makes me think very differently about the ego, about why we focus on our ego, why it has a villainous thing to it. And actually, it's been our protector.
Right. Yes. It's been trying so hard to serve us, to keep us in that familiar, to keep us knowing ourselves in the way that we become comfortable. And anything outside of that, any perspective that doesn't match, this is again where we can get heated arguments with loved ones, even very well-meaning ones, who point out the shadow sides of us, the things that are harder for us to see, right? And or when we hear people who express beliefs outside of our own beliefs, we can become really reactive and squash, because the reason being, again, going back to this, what feels like disproportionate reactions in those moments actually aren't disproportionate, right? There are safety-making mechanisms. We feel challenged, threatened when we're having a new experience or hearing something new about ourselves. And if I've only come to identify with that very egoic story or who I think I am, now I'm going to be really challenged anytime I hear those alternate perspectives. And I'm not going to want to let this new information in, because then I've become unfamiliar to even myself.
Now you're challenging everything that I think of, and that challenge now becomes extremely uncomfortable.
Yes. Now I have no option but to take it personally, because what I feel is happening is a very personal attack. But we have to understand, so not to villainize it means observing it, seeing these stories, seeing how we're coloring our experiences with possibly this reactivity, and expanding the space to acknowledge all of the rest of us. Everything that maybe didn't have space or safety in our childhood to express, everything that maybe I've shut down about myself to at one point keep myself connected and safe, that's still part of us. So the goal of ego work in general is to acknowledge that I've yet to meet a human who doesn't have an ego, who's not doing some of this subconscious filtering and biasing and reacting when it's kind of outside of our familiar bounds of self, to acknowledge that maybe in those moments we are feeling a bit threatened, and then over time being able to expand and allowing in the rest of our being that probably has been just pushed below the surface.
I love that. And you also say like name your ego, Jessica.
That's right. I think it can be really, really helpful. And that's like a silly way to play with it, but to create that separation, right? If I can, the ego isn't, it's a part of my story. It's been a very validated part of my story that, again, has kept me safely protected as the overachiever without needs, because that's who I had to be. So thank you, Jessica, for your service. And I think sometimes acknowledging when that voice is active by calling it Jessica's voice can be the beginning of that separation. Jessica is part of my story, has played a protective role in my story, but Jessica isn't who Nicole is. There's much more to Nicole. So I invite anyone listening to not only observe their ego, anytime we think anytime we're having thoughts that are very much kind of about me, who I think I am, what my place is in the world, pay attention to how repetitive and habitual those stories are. That might be the voice of that ego. And if you would like to give your ego a name, again, I think that can help create that separation, maybe even add a bit of humor, which I think helps on all of our journeys. When the ego comes alive, you can acknowledge, oh, Jessica, you know.
That's what I really like about it. And obviously, you know, people have talked about like alter egos, but I've never really thought about it in this realm as a way to help yourself get over triggers, get over emotional issues, get over trauma. Like I've never really thought of, I've always thought of like, you know, alter ego like Sasha Fierce.
Yes,
right?
yes.
It's like, and it's like me with my hair. It's like, I don't always have my hair like this, but it's my way of showing up. But I've never thought of ego as being like that. Like when you have something that maybe stings or maybe it shows up, to just say, oh, it's Jessica. You know, like having that kind of like your mate where it's like, oh, it's her, but it doesn't mean that it's me. Because I think when we think of it as being, this is who I am, it can like really like create knots. I mean, explain to me actually what that's doing to us.
I think what you're describing is that constriction, is limitation, right? It's kind of shrinking in. I mean, when we've defined who we are, we don't really give us any other option to have any other experience of ourselves. I think egos, identities, to some extent, largely can be limiting if we make that our whole story. And the reality is, and I think it's a tough reality for most of us living this human experience, is that we are multidimensional. There isn't just one way to kind of summarize or put in a bucket or put a hat on what I am even, right? There's so much of what I am. And I can even make a case that there's an evolution of what I am in and of myself. So when we embrace that multidimensionality, I think then we allow ourselves that space. But so few of us do that. We become constricted. We kind of even feel ourselves tense inside. And I could even go as far to say that some of us inhabit then the role of, and this is where we can talk about, and actually the next book that I'm working on relationships is going to talk a lot about what I call conditioned selves, when this idea of ego actually morphs into this whole embodied function role I play, where I become, right, the caretaker in a relationship, where my whole sense of self is based on this idea of that's all I am. I'm a person who provides care. My neurobiology shifts, and I embody that actual self. So I can make a statement that ego, right, becomes the cloud that some of us can become the weather of. And we limit ourselves that we can't even imagine stepping outside of our roles, let alone our stories.
Wow, girl, that's so strong. You mentioned that, I didn't want to interrupt you, our shadow selves. So how in everything that we're talking about, can we identify what our shadow selves are? If you actually don't mind explaining what that is, yeah, let's start there.
Yes, so our shadow is all of the repressed, which means kept out of our awareness, aspects of ourselves. So if in childhood, again, we didn't have the space to be sad, be angry, maybe just self-express our creativity or just be who we are, the more consistently we got a message, direct or indirect, not to do that, that those things don't go away, emotions don't go away, that aspect of ourself doesn't go away. It might go out of our conscious awareness, and then we call that it's repressed in our shadow, if you will. Think of like the shadow that's cast, we can't see it necessarily. Where we do experience our shadow often is sometimes when we have, this is very interesting, it's funny that I brought that dance story. I imagine this is why, I didn't know you were gonna go to shadow, but what I would notice when good old Instagram came to be, the dancing app as it was began, you can imagine where I'm going here, scrolling Instagram, seeing people dance freely, that constriction you just felt, I would almost seethe inside. I would feel my body clench, and I might even think some negative, critical things about the dancer. Not, oh wow, look at this beautiful dancer in full self-expression, how nice, what a thing that my little self would have wanted. So repressed, all of that, that what I saw in that freedom of self-expression, that ease in the body that at least communicates to me when I see someone dancing, all of that aspect of myself was so pushed outside of my awareness. The desire to be free and at ease in my body was projected, is what we call it, and came out as irritation, negative reaction at something I see in someone else. Understanding that the shadow of it, right, was in me. I didn't see it in myself. The ability to be easeful, free, connected to one's body, I saw it in that person and I had a negative reaction. So that's a lot of times where we can see our shadow reflected when we are turned off by certain aspects of another person, is a really great place to wonder within. seeing if there's an aspect of ourself, because I can make a case that we all have aspects of everyone inside of us.
Right.
You know, I mean, there's certain times where we're all a little bit of something in different moments. So when we have those big visceral reactions can be an indicator. And it isn't always negative things that we're repressing, right? Some of us might have learned to repress even our ability to shine, talents that we've had. If there wasn't space, or if that wasn't rewarded, maybe in the traditional sense, our parents didn't think that that was going to get us the good paying job that they wanted. It could be some of our natural gifts and talents that we've squashed below the surface. Again, all because of the messaging that we got. Doesn't mean it's not in us. Oftentimes it's activated when we see it in someone else, and usually it's unfavorable how we're feeling, because when it really comes down to it, we don't like that part of ourselves.
Oh, and so do you think that we should start, I mean, yes, you have a workbook, so I'm sure your answer's going to be yes, but like starting to take inventory, because as you were talking, it's like, how do you actually start to identify your shadow self? Obviously, you said, you know, when you're starting to get that uncomfortable, maybe that negative, like that could be a sign. Is that where people should start? Like if someone's just starting right now and they're like, oh, I don't recognize that I'm showing up like that. I actually do believe I really hate this dance and I really hate that, you know, the shoes that that woman's wearing or whatever. But a lot of the time there's that deep rooted thing, right? So what would you suggest? Yeah, would it be inventory, then backtracking? What would that look like?
Yeah, paying attention. I think anytime, I'm going to answer this really globally, anytime we're having a feeling, we can get really curious and begin to explore what's causing it. So whether it's the negative reaction to the Instagram post that you're seeing, the negative reaction to the comment that your partner made, right? Feelings are meant to provide us information. If we can learn, right, how to, in a grounded way, see them, allow them in, I should say first, and allow them to not dysregulate us so that they can be part of our experience, but not color our experience and overwhelm us and send us back into that cycle of reactivity. But when we can, you know, negotiate life with emotions, then I think any time we have an emotion that's activated, especially a big one, can give us an opportunity to then explore, and then getting really honest. Okay, well, what is it? What am I reacting to? What is it about those shoes? What is my mind telling myself about the person who wears those shoes maybe? Oh, well, that's a person who would X, Y, or Z, and oh, that's something that I don't want to be about. Oh, okay, well, can I see any moments where I am X, Y, or Z, or where I too act on X, Y, or Z, right? That's just a little bit of a quick way of doing that backtracking. But start with any feelings. Feelings are information. The more consistently we have feelings, the bigger the feelings are, we can explore. Again, what is the meaning I'm making? What is my mind telling me about the person who's wearing or doing this thing? And if I'm really honest, can I locate a place in time where I see that in me? And can I work to allow that to be okay?
That is so beautiful. And you said this earlier, but I want to repeat it because it fits so perfectly here as well, is that once you start to understand everything you're saying, once you start to practice it yourself, you can now actually see it in other people, and I think have more understanding. So when someone is coming to you having this, you know, heightened reaction, if you've already done the work and you're like, oh, this may be their shadow self, what am I doing? Like, I try to be as empathetic as I possibly can. And look, we're on social, so we probably open ourselves up a lot more than other people. But when you get pushback, hate, negative comments, whether it's on social or even within your own family, I try to then put on my empathetic hat. And now you're giving me words to be able to use, because I normally say, oh, I've probably triggered them. How did I trigger them? Like, I kind of just go to that because I'm like, well, because I wore my hair like this, all of a sudden they're freaking out. Like, what the hell did I, do? And so I go, okay, it's a trigger. But now being able to use the shadow self is actually really beautiful language to be able to say, like, what is in their shadow self, and maybe they've squished that I'm triggering that to now rear its head.
Yeah, what you're describing really beautifully, Lisa, is what I call depersonalizing, right? Learning to pull back and have that inquiry and see, the moments where it could be about us. And this is where I say, having that nuance, that discretion, maybe not believing strangers on the internet who never met you, but maybe do listening to those close loved ones that have your best interest and might offer you that vantage point that we were talking about earlier. And in the moments, again, where it is a heightened reaction, it is a reaction or someone's making an assessment about you that they couldn't possibly know to be true because they don't know you, then you could kind of pull back and understand things and explore things from that vantage point, from a less personal. Yeah, they're saying and reacting to my words, my appearance, my way of being, or whatever it is, but for them, it's coming from a deeper place. I don't even have to invalidate, nor would I want to. Their feeling is very real. They're having a very real emotional reaction, though it might not be to me in particular, right? Just like I project similar, like we've been talking about this whole conversation, right? There might be a similarity or a meaning that they've made over what they think they see or how they're perceiving or subjectively hearing what I'm saying or subjectively seeing how I'm presenting, that again is very similar to something that they've lived. Not invalidating what their feelings and of course creating boundaries so I can safely allow them to have their feeling while I'm safely over here. But that's essentially the process of depersonalizing. I can understand it from a less personal perspective than I was able to in childhood.
Yeah, I love that. Dude, as you were talking, I was like, all right, let's just go masterclass on this interview right now. So everything you're saying, once we do the work, you even said like when there are people around you that you can really trust, that's obviously very important to feel safe around you, for someone to be able to maybe help you through things or point something out. What the hell do you do if there's someone that you very much trust, they've proven time and time again that they absolutely have your back, that they love you more than life itself, that they want good things for you, but their advice and feedback is all coming from their shadow self?
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting question. In terms of understanding, of course, the more we know about someone, right, the more then we could have even like this statement, oh, I can see where this is ultimately coming from. I mean, we have choice, we can hear, we can listen. Ultimately, what we do on someone's feedback, on someone's perception, on someone's perspective is up to us. And I just want to emphasize this because most of us as humans, all of us as humans, we want to be heard. We want our perspective to be taken into consideration. We want to know we matter. We want to know that, you know, if we are sharing our perspective, even if it's coming from our shadow self with a loved one, that it's not landing on deaf ears or being argued. So there's a way, I believe, to sensitively hear and listen, though ultimately it is our choice what we do with the information. So then having that moment where we can hear and graciously thank someone for their feedback, their perspective. You know, we may not be able to convince them where it is coming from, even if we do have that vantage point of coming from the shadow, because ultimately we can offer it. It's up to them to choose it. So just as much as we can hear their feedback, we then go and I kind of have a visual feedback from anywhere that we can receive it from someone's shadow, well-meaning or not, and decide for ourselves. And I believe that needs to be part of the discretion, the developing of discretion journey of humans, is to have that moment in time, have that listen, not argue, not even try to convince someone that it's coming from our shadow, because if they're not willing to hear it, they're not going to be open to us being blue in the face, screaming and yelling or arguing it, so we can receive that information. Thank you for sharing your perspective. And then we could take that to our home base. We can then go observe ourselves and see if we see from their perspective what they mean. And ultimately we get to choose, because it might not be for us. It might not be about us. It might never have been. And then we can have that choice. They feel heard. We feel empowered to continue on in the way that we know aligns with us.
Oh, I love that so much. And how much then, because you talk about heart consciousness, which I love. I'd never heard that before. So talk to me about heart consciousness and how this also plays in relationships when you have these moments where you have to go in and really listen to yourself and not necessarily take your partner or a friend's thoughts and advice as fact.
Yeah, so our heart is, we are now finding out very scientifically how incredibly powerful our heart is. I mean, there's so much about the human body from the shoulders down that it is so incredibly powerful and so full of wisdom, from our gut, where we have those gut instincts, to our heart. We now know that our heart actually submits an electromagnetic field that's even more powerful than our brain. It's usually measured in how many feet away you can kind of feel the vibration or the frequency of our heart or our brain producing. And our heart, I think it's somewhere around 6 feet around us, can influence. So if there was electrodes, say in a glass of water, my heartbeat would be able to, if it's within that 6 feet, I mean, don't quote me, I could be wrong on the exact numbers, but I think it's around 6 feet of our body, you would pick up my heart frequency more so than my brain frequency in that glass of water. So our heart is not only communicating signals to the external environment, it's communicating signals to our brain. Our heart actually plays a big role in coordinating activity. We used to give our brain all of the credit. Our brain was everything. And our brain is very, very powerful. But again, so is our gut and so is our heart.
Yeah.
And just as much as our brain is sending information down, our heart is sending so much coordination of not only physiological but emotional messaging up to our brain. So as far as I'm concerned, our heart is the location of that intuition, that essence, right? That kind of indescribable sensation or compass or guidance system that we're all looking for. And because so few of us are paying actually attention to our heart, not only again is it our interface for our environment, giving us information about how we're experiencing it, in my opinion, like I said, it is really a vessel of what makes us us. I mean, I've read fascinating stories of, I don't know if you've gone down the rabbit hole of any heart transplant or there's incredible stories of heart transplant stories where hearts of, individuals who have passed get obviously implanted into a living individual. And to the surprise, I think, of everyone involved, not only memories, taste, preferences begin to become evident with this idea that our heart actually has like memories that's stored in it. So our heart is incredibly fascinating. Again, very few of us, I think for the point of this conversation, we're not connected to our heart. Or if we are, if we have those, again, instincts, sensations, because our heart doesn't speak in our thinking mind in the repetitive stories, it's sensations, it's kind of, I can't think of the word, little indications, aha, light bulbs, kind of things that seemingly plop into our, conscious awareness seemingly out of nowhere. All of that is more of the language, it's body-based is the point I'm trying to make, of our intuition. And if we're paying attention to our mind, if we're not even attuned to our heart, or if we are and we feel like we know what our heart wants, but we override it based on what we think we should do or what we were taught to do or a million other reasons we convince ourselves out of doing those things. And I'm of the belief that the more, again, we drop into our body, the more we learn how to reintegrate or reconnect with our heart and then attune to its messages, because again, it's much more on a sensory system. We have to learn to hear, even the way you describe, I feel that kind of constriction, right? That's coming from somewhere deeper within. So learning to pay attention to those signals will, in my opinion, give us that guidance that we're looking for, giving us the moments of saying, well, wait a minute, what does my heart say about this? What does my heart want to do? And the more, of course, we can align our actions with that heart space, the more then we're allowing our intuition to guide us.
That's amazing. But what about so, like when in relationships, so many people just like, oh, well, don't just follow your heart. Like, your heart's going to lead you astray because it's like it wants something. So maybe, the messaging that I've heard is your heart so wants to, let's say, be with somebody that it will be blind to certain things. People blame the heart for that. Do you agree with that?
I would question whether or not they're following their heart or their familiar relationship pattern in those moments, right? Because I think to really attune to our heart, it's again learning how to drop in. And I think a lot of times what we're attracted to in relationships or what we think we're gravitating toward or is coming again from that instinctive place is more maybe coming from the familiarity of that dynamic than from the deeper heart space.
So when people would say, let's say, or the phrase, it's a broken heart, do you feel like that is actually the heart that's broken, or that it's our perception of what this means about us, let's say stemming from a child where when we were dismissed or someone's left me, my heart breaks, but really makes me feel like I'm no good, I'm not worthy.
And that produces a feeling in our heart too. So it's both and. Again, our heart is very much a conductor of our emotions. Our heart goes in and out of what's called coherence based on the emotion we're feeling. When we're feeling compassion, when we're feeling connection, when we're feeling love, it's described as we're in heart coherence. The rhythm of our heart actually changes when we're feeling anger, when we're feeling hurt, when we're feeling sadness. We actually did a podcast episode, Jen and I, on heartbreak. And how very much it's in the body and it does map onto pain and a shift in our heart's rhythm. So it's it's what happened in childhood, maybe it's similarity or lack thereof in what's happening now. It's still very real, producing very real feelings, which we can actually feel sometimes in our physical heart space where it does feel like it's breaking. And it maps onto a physiological change in rhythm in terms of coherence versus incoherence.
That's fascinating.
It's really
Oh
fascinating.
my
I'm
God.
fascinated by the heart.
That's incredible. And, you know, even in the book where you take people through, you know, like put your hand on your heart, take these deep breaths. So as I was listening to it on Audible, but like as I was doing it, I was putting my hand on my heart. You were coaching me through it. And as I was doing it, I was like, I don't remember the last time I put my hand on my heart. Yeah. I don't know the last time that I thought about my heart.
Right.
And as you were talking, also the time that most recently sticks to me is when my puppy passed away, my dog. You know, he was 17, it was Tom and I's baby. And I remember when he died, all I could do was put my hand on my heart and go, my heart's broken. I was like, my heart hurts. And I just kept repeating to Tom, like, my heart hurts. I don't know why I'm getting all emotional. Wow. And I don't remember the last time I ever felt like my heart hurt. And it was like I was like putting my hand on my heart and just like trying to protect it. I've never done that before.
Yeah, I have memories in childhood. One of the most visceral memories I have is laying in bed at night, and it would usually come around a recurring nightmare that I would have, and I would wake up from this nightmare, and the pressure, it would feel like someone was putting their hand straight through my heart space, and I never had language and knew what it was, and obviously now looking back, I believe it was a broken heart of not having, for me, that connection with really anyone in my family, feeling so deeply alone, and that I remember very viscerally in childhood. I can almost call to mind what it was to feel that, and it was in my heart space. And then as I grew, interestingly, my posture even, for a very long time, my mom would be like, stand up straight. Don't you like being tall? And, you know, I would roll my eyes at her as, you know, oftentimes an adolescent, a teenager does, like, oh, mom, you know. And again, I now view it through the lens of I was protecting this whole kind of hunched posture, at least the sense I've made of it, was coming from quite literally a broken heart of no fault of my mom or my family's own, of their inability of themselves to even be connected to themselves, let alone me, of a broken heart, and then my whole postural, right, protection that then translated to this distance in relationships, never acting like I had feelings, because I was never going to let my heart be broken again. And it was then, again, that visceral feeling in the heart that I can even recollect now of like, almost like takes my breath away feeling.
Oh my God, you're tapping into something so strong right now.
Click here right now to learn the 7 ways to stop manipulation and gaslighting.
When we are truly dealing with a manipulation strategy, is that we tend to get gaslit into believing that what we're saying happened didn't happen. And all of a sudden, you go from